I remember I was up at the conference center, and there was this huge banner, and it says, DNA proves the Book of Mormon is false. Where's the Hebrew bloodlines in the indigenous peoples of the Americas, right? And all of a sudden in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology and other genetics journals, they started talking about this new group that didn't have Asian markers, and instead have markers that actually indicate that they were closely related to the Hebrews.
And the comments are going to be like, well, that was debunked, that was debunked, that was debunked, right? So it's obviously not so cut and dry. There is a little bit of controversy. What are the critics saying about this? Stay tuned, because we're about to explain how you can win this 2,600-year-old artifact from the time of Lehi.
Okay, I'm not one to be dramatic or over-embellish, but this conversation that we had recorded with Rod Meldrum is one that maybe changed my life, and also the 2-hour conversation that we had after we stopped recording.
It was probably more like 3 hours. He was here for a long time.
Such a good guy, and he has done so much for Book of Mormon research that we just had to bring him onto the channel. But going into this new year, we really want to upgrade the level of content that we're bringing to you guys. But to do that, we need more manpower for research and editing and a lot of other stuff that goes into making these videos.
So what we've done is we've created a Patreon where you can support us at 3 different levels. Now, we're not just gonna ask for your support, we're gonna deliver with the content, but also we have a really cool giveaway. Right here in my hand, I have an artifact that is 2,600 years old, so that dates all the way back to the time of Lehi, and was found in that same area in Jerusalem. This is a Scythian arrowhead, and the other thing that's really cool is that these arrowheads were used by the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem as Lehi prophesied in 586 BC. Plus, more likely than not, these are the arrowheads that Nephi would have used when he recreated his arrows when he fixed his bow. And we're gonna give it to one of you. All you're gonna need to do to throw your name in the hat that we're gonna draw from to receive this ancient antiquity is subscribe to one of our 3 Patreon levels.
Our first level is $1 a month, which works out to be about 4 pennies a day. So if you think
Actually less than 4 pennies a day.
Well, if you think our content is worth at least 4 pennies a day, go ahead and subscribe to that first level. That'll stamp your name in the clouds as joining the Stick of Joseph family and give you 1 entry to the giveaway.
Level number 2 is $2.99 a month, and this comes with an extra really cool perk. So you're gonna get 3 entries into the Scythian Arrowhead giveaway, but on top of that, you're gonna get access to our very own Stick of Joseph Book of Mormon Discord community.
Okay, I don't mean to cut you off, bro, but I need to accurately describe what this is going to be. This is going to be the strongest online Book of Mormon community on planet Earth. It's gonna be a place where, I mean, what is Discord?
Okay, so Discord essentially is a giant group message mixed with an internet forum where everybody can get together on multiple channels and talk about a variety of subjects, share papers, share videos, and all this research regarding the Book of Mormon. So we're gonna have multiple channels. We'll have a channel where we can talk about Heartland theory, channel where you can talk about the Mesoamerican theory, a channel about just the doctrine of the Book of Mormon, and all together we're gonna be able to share in this pool of amazing information and just fire us all up about the Book of Mormon.
And finally, our 3rd tier of support, which is $4.99 a month, which will grant you 5 entries to our Ancient Artifact giveaway, access to our Discord community, all of our content ad-free, and we're gonna be uploading everything in podcast form so you can listen and not have to have your YouTube open.
With your guys' support, we're gonna be able to level up, give the best research, the best production quality, and continue to share the Book of Mormon in a way that it hasn't before. So show some love for the content that we make, and don't miss out on your opportunity to win this ancient artifact. If you want to enter the drawing, link in the description, click on that, and we'll see you on February 1st. Enjoy the video. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Stick of Joseph. We are the Paul brothers, and we are joined today by Rod Meldrum, who is one of the most ardent supporters of the Mesoamerican theory of the Book of Mormon.
Hey, now wait.
Might be ex-believers of the Mesoamerican model. We don't know. We'll get into everything and more.
Former.
Recovering.
Okay.
Yes.
So, by popular demand, we brought Rod on because he is one of the biggest, supporters for the Book of Mormon. Actually, every 6 months, he holds what's called the Firm Foundation Expo. Is that right?
Yeah. And the International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference.
Mm-hmm. Which is really the only public, open to the public conference about the Book of Mormon that exists, right? It's like anyone can come.
Well, and it's by far the largest. I mean, we've had upwards of 7,500 people that come
Really?
on a 3 days with with 60 or 70 speakers and 130 classes. I mean,
Holy
it's
cow.
it's kind of like a education week on steroids over a weekend.
For sure. And you eat, sleep, and drink Book of Mormon, right?
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of work in the Book of Mormon geography area. And so we're going to get into all of that. First off, I'm curious because I don't know if I've ever heard this question asked you before. Why are you so like obsessed with this subject? What's your story behind that?
How long do you have, actually? Well, I mean, bottom line is that my parents, it kind of goes all the way back to, I have to kind of blame my dad, because he actually served a mission, a 3-year mission in the Central States mission, and he didn't have a single convert baptism. And
He was that bad of a mission.
Goes with the Meldrum line, I guess. But no, I improved on that, because when I left for my mission in Italy, I was proud of the fact that I actually doubled the mission average in baptism.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I had 2.
Yeah, 2. That's hilarious.
So my dad came back kind of dejected, and he found my mom at BY Academy, and then she's a city girl from St. Louis, and he's a country boy from up in Washington State and the Tri-Cities area there. Anyway, and so they hit it off, got married, and they decided, you know what, if we can't have any convert baptisms as a missionary, maybe we can raise up a few converts. So I have to give all the credit to my parents. They were absolutely stalwarts, and we did everything, as a family that somebody who was like the perfect LDS family would be doing. So we had family home evenings and scripture study every morning and prayers and all that kind of stuff. So in fact, my mom was a big advocate of like living scriptures kind of thing. With, these. And in fact, when we go on vacations, we couldn't even we couldn't listen to the radio in the car until we had an equal amount of time listening to cassette tapes of dramatized Book of Mormon
Really?
and so forth.
That's wild.
So by the time I got on my mission, I'd been through the Book of
story
Mormon
a
numerous
lot of times,
Yes, and so I knew the story, but I hadn't really delved deeply into it. But it was interesting because the whole time every time I'd hear about a mighty Gentile nation above all other nations, a land of liberty, a land of prosperity and security and so forth, I just kind of, in my heart of hearts, I knew that was, well, they're talking about the United States. And then when I went to seminary and then ultimately the Institute, and I was taught a whole different
You learned
thing.
you were wrong.
And I learned I was wrong. I was like, well, these guys are a lot smarter than I am. I'll just go with it. But it still kind of was always in my craw. How do you explain, a mighty Gentile nation above all other nations being Guatemala? I mean, in what way are they? Do they fulfill that?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it kind of came to a crux for me because I was the young men's president of our ward. There was a young man there who was not going on a mission for whatever reason. I knew he had some testimony because we'd been on campouts and things and whatever. Anyway, long story short is that his parents moved and they helped him move. And then a couple days later, his mom shows up with this DVD at my house and said, and she said, Brother Meldrum, you do scientific research. Is that correct? And I said, well, yeah, I do. And she said, well, you need to watch this DVD. And she handed me a copy of, it's called DNA versus the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why do I need to watch this? She said, because it's true. And she was in the process of having their names removed from the church records and so forth. And people say, well, maybe she just had a weak testimony. That happens. People fall out. But this was not a weak testimony person. I mean, she was, I think, 16 years old when she learned of the gospel down in, I think it was in I can't remember exactly which, I think it was in Brazil where she was. She decided to join the church. She was immediately ostracized by her parents and had to be on her own. She worked for a couple of years to get enough money to come to the United States and went to BYU and found her husband, and they have 3 beautiful kids. Yeah. She's been a Relief Society president twice. So this is not a weakling.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we use that as like a scapegoat to just be like, oh, it's because they have a weak testimony. That's why they're leaving. They didn't do this or do that. And we don't give credence to the fact, well, no, maybe these claims that are being made, DNA with the Book of Mormon or geographical claims or historical claims, maybe they actually do rock people's testimonies. And maybe that
Absolutely
is a
they do.
legitimate reason
Yeah.
why someone might be worried. It's not just because they want to go out and sin or do this and that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the general idea that, well, people just, they just don't want to live the standards. They just don't, she was living all the standards. She this rocked her testimony to the core.
Yeah.
And I knew about the video already, and it was, and that, you have to say, it was pretty devastating for a long time. There were, I would say, even tens of thousands of members of the church who were rocked by this, because DNA is something that's used in the courts of law. You can't fake it. You can't, there's theoretical aspects of it, but actually the sequencing of DNA is pretty straightforward. And so that was a big deal. That kind of became sort of the catalyst. And then I was
What were your thoughts when you watched it? When you watched it, did it rock you a little bit?
No, because I already, at that point in time, I was already starting to do some of this research, and honestly, and this is my caveat here, okay, my disclaimer, if you will. People say, well, so you base your testimony on the evidences of the Book of Mormon. If there's no evidence, then your testimony gets thrown under the bus, and my answer to that is no. And so I will fully admit I am very biased.
Yeah.
Because of an experience that I had in the MTC. So I actually talked a lot about this on John DeLynne's show. But anyway, but basically I had an opportunity to have a friend of mine that had a mink ranch. Basically, I was
a mink ranch.
A mink ranch, yeah. So,
shout out to the guy who follows us who raises minks. We have like a big fan
ranchers.
who loves minks.
If there any are left, I don't think there's any left.
Oh, there's one left.
There's one.
He's wild.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so the name is Lance Bohm. Actually, he's still around, but he offered me a job to manage his mink ranch after I had gotten through with another project that I was working on over in Colorado on a coal exploration drilling project, which made tons and tons of money, made enough to pay for my whole mission in just a few months. It was awesome. And that was actually a direct result of paying tithing. So, so over the course of time, even though my parents were teaching me these things, I had to learn a lot of these things for myself. And the bottom line is he was offering a job that was making almost twice as much as my dad was making at Utah State University. Working up there, and a house was included. I had a girlfriend at the time.
They gave you a girlfriend?
No, I had one. I said I had one. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I had this hot car, a muscle car and so forth. I thought I had the world by the tail, but I always wanted to go on a mission. Anyway, so what ended up happening is that he offered me this job, and I turned it down because I said, I'm going to go on a mission. So I was called for 2 years, and I was in the MTC when they actually changed it to 18 months. There was no choice in the matter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But anyway, so I'm in the MTC, and I'm realizing, I'm making a big sacrifice here, right? As if a mission is a sacrifice. But anyway, so I said, I'm giving up all these things to go on a mission, and I'm not even 100% sure that the Book of Mormon is even true. And so I kind of put the Lord to the test, basically, and just said, I'm already 3/4 of the way through the Book of Mormon. I'm going to finish reading it, and if I haven't got my answer to whether this book is true or not, then I'm
going back to the car.
I'm going back. I'm going to hit the car. I'm going to marry that girl. I'm going to take that job, move into that house, and I'm going to live happily ever after. Because I have to know.
Yeah.
And the Lord let me. It's kind of interesting. He seems to always do this. He lets you go down right to the last second kind of thing,
A lot of times.
And then while I was in the MTC, I got to the last part of the Book of Mormon where it's talking about how wicked the Lamanites had become. And then it talks about, and the Nephites are even worse, the depravities that they were doing.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of sickened by this whole thing. How could people so enlightened, become so
gross,
disgusting and completely off the path. And then that's when you get to the promise. And I was there. I said, Lord, I'm getting really close to the end. I don't have my answer yet, and I'm serious. I'm going home if I don't have an answer. And I've been praying about it and fasting about it and so forth. Anyway, my companion had gone to bed. It was late at night in the MTC, and I'm sitting there. And I get to the promise, and I started to read the promise, when you shall receive these things, right? I exhort you, right? Anyway, and I'll just say that I had the most profound spiritual experience of my life up to that point. And for hours, I literally I walked around the MTC. It's kind of a circular thing. You can go on each floor, right? And so I'd go around the MTC, Missionary Training Center, for those of you who don't know what that is. Anyway, and I just felt, number one, I had an absolute witness that the Book of Mormon was true. Number two, I knew that the Savior loved me. There was just this overfilling, just completely overwhelmed by the love I felt. And from that point, I've never looked back.
Yeah.
So it's basically,
that's awesome.
So when people say, well, why are you interested in this and whatever, I do have a bias. I already know it's true.
Yeah.
But because I know it's true, I know there's going to be evidence for the book. It claims to be a historical record. Where's the history? Where did it turn out?
Okay.
I think everybody, I mean, I don't know. Have you ever thought about where the Book of Mormon took place? Has that ever been
once or twice?
Yeah. Actually, the first time I actually thought about it legitimately was at your conference. Before we even started this whole thing, I was engaged to my now wife, and my soon-to-be mother-in-law just called me up. She's like, "Hey, do you want to go to this Book of Mormon Evidences conference with me?" I'm like, "No, but might as well go."
Yeah.
And so then we went, and then I remember looking at maps, and I'm like, where people were thinking where Zarahemla was and stuff. And I'm like, what? Is that true? And then I remember I went home that whole day, that whole night, just looking up all this stuff, came across Wayne May's stuff, came across Scripture Central. And that's kind of where the fire started with me. So I thank you for that, because that was kind of the catalyst that led us to where we are now. And so
for sure. And so let's get into it now.
Yeah.
Let's start getting into this stuff. What was the first question you were looking for answers for when it came to the historicity of the Book of Mormon?
Well, for me, basically, already having a
testimony.
The testimony of the book is true. The geography thing wasn't that big of a thing for me, honestly. What was a big thing was the DNA thing, because that was causing this I considered kind of the kids in my my priest group or whatever, to kind of be like my kids, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't going on a mission, oh man, what's going on here? And so it became very personal for me. And so then, the whole DNA thing was blowing up, and basically the general idea is that there's no DNA evidence, because when they sequence DNA from, Central America and really all over the Americas, they're all Asiatic DNA lineages, descendants, and Lehi and his family weren't Asians, so they came through the lineage of Shem and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and down through Joseph and so forth, right? So they're from the 12 tribes. So anyway, so it became personal for me at that point. I remember I was up at the conference center up at I think it was 2002, and there was this huge banner, and it says DNA proves the Book of Mormon is false. And I was like, okay. So at the time I was working with some friends on a natural sciences textbook project, and had access to some of the top research libraries. And I thought, I'm going to check into this. I mean, why do they think the DNA would disprove the Book of Mormon? And it comes down to, if the Book of Mormon is about Hebrews, basically, where's the Hebrew bloodlines in the indigenous peoples of the Americas, right? And so that led me to begin to do research involving the DNA stuff. We'd already done some DNA studies and so forth for this other project, and so it was kind of an add-on. Anyway, so started looking into it and started finding out that in fact in the DVD, the DNA versus the Book of Mormon, they have an interview that was done by this German reporter with President Hinckley. And in the interview, the German reporter says, well, what's going to be your church's position when DNA analysis shows that there's no Hebrew DNA in the Americas?
Yeah.
And President Hinckley, I mean, you can see on his face, he's a little perturbed by the question. And he kind of cuts the guy off and says, that hasn't been established yet. Nobody knows the answer to that, not at this point. And it turns out that was a prophetic statement. Because about a year after that, all of a sudden articles started coming out about a new haplotype. So a haplogroup is like a major group of related descendants,
DNA,
right? DNA
okay.
descendants. And everything at that point had pointed to being Asiatic, Asian bloodlines, okay? And all of a sudden in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology and other genetics journals, they started talking about this new group that didn't have Asian markers, that didn't have the same markers as Asiatic populations have, and instead have markers that actually indicate that they were closely related to the Hebrews and
it's a
Europeans.
haplogroup X, right? Is that?
And that's haplogroup X.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they said, this haplogroup X is shown up in all these different places, but it specifically is in these Jewish populations, including the Sephardic Jews, the Libyan Jews, the Moroccan Jews, the Tunisian Jews, all these diverse Jewish populations
in northern
that have
Africa
spread around after the diaspora of Israel.
Yeah.
They have 5 markers that are in the Native Americans, in the Algonquin-speaking language groups, which is about 110 tribes. And I'm like, whoa, that's kind of cool. So maybe there's possibility.
Yes, and the Algonquin, just for those who don't know, the Algonquin native groups are the ones that are all along the East Coast, up in the New York area, the Wampanoag, which was the first natives that the Pilgrims met. They're from the Algonquin family, correct? And so that clears it up. But it isn't. I want to talk about this because I want to give you a chance to, because there's going to be people in the comments that are going to be like, well, that was debunked. That was debunked. That was debunked. Right. So it's obviously not so cut and dry. There is a little bit of controversy. What are the critics saying about this?
Well, there's no controversy if you go to the general journals.
Okay.
As far as there's controversy in everything.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
There's some things you can establish, that are not, for example, that the haplogroup X is directly related to these Native American populations have haplogroup X, and so do Jewish populations all over the world. Not just Jewish populations, but Europeans. But even in mainstream genetics, they say that the source population of this haplogroup X was somewhere in the Middle East, which is clearly
where the Book of Mormon starts.
It's similar to what the Book of Mormon is talking about.
What do the critics say? Because I know that there have been critics. I know Mormon Stories, for example, had a couple guys that were criticizing. What was their arguments? And just so that we understand.
Well, the primary argument, there's no question as to whether or not they're related. The question is how distantly related are they? So it's a matter of dating and timing. Okay. As far as that, because the first time they said, well,
you can date DNA, like how long ago a specific genetic sequence was like entered into or introduced.
Well, obviously nobody was back there with instrumentation to be able to take samples and do DNA analysis of those early people. So there are extrapolations, and that's what we're going to really. Okay. If we really want to get into the DNA subject, that's what we have to go into, because the extrapolation basically. So they actually came up with 2 different types of dating, without going into all the details on how that actually all works. That would be a few hours.
It'd be a long time. We don't need to do that. So we might have to do our own investigation. I have to talk to you, get the resources, and we'll do a separate video or something.
Yeah, well, it's going to take years. Yeah. Because it's and I haven't actually done any new research on the DNA part for a number of years, but other people have. Yeah. And which has been great to kind of get it updated. But the original information has never been, refuted or whatever. Yeah. So basically, there's 5 different primary groups here in the Americas, and they call them haplogroups. So haplogroups A, B, C, and D. All of those are Asiatic. Yeah. Okay, and so like haplogroup A is up in the Aleutians, up in Alaska. Haplogroups B and C are throughout Central and North Central and South America. And haplogroup D is in like the American, or B is in the Southwest, and then haplogroup C and D are throughout the Americas. Yeah. And then anyway, so when they found this other group has actually had 5 specific markers. Okay. Anyway, so the way that the dating is done, now this was, when I was doing this, was primarily mitochondrial DNA, which is DNA that's passed from mothers to all their offspring, but only their daughters will pass it along. Yeah. Okay, so there's specific parts of DNA that are only passed through the mother's side, and then on the father's side. Okay. Yeah, so there's autosomal DNA.
We're gonna have to do a deep dive into this later.
DNA and mitochondrial
Makes
DNA.
Sense of it. Okay.
But at the time I was doing my original research, mitochondrial DNA was the one that was kind of leading out, if you will. Anyway, so what happened basically is that how do you date that? How do you know how long it was? Well, you have to extrapolate something.
Yeah.
And so the extrapolation is that they said, well, we know that humans came from apes about 5 million years ago, right? And then the last common ancestor of all humans, they call her mitochondrial Eve, kind of as a play on words,
Play on words,
thing,
yeah.
an irony, if you will. They call her mitochondrial Eve was about 200,000 years ago. Okay, and so if you take when we split from the apes, and you take the sequence, the DNA from the great apes, basically, and take DNA and sequence it from the humans, how many tweaks on the DNA does it take before you get to there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you can quantify that to some extent, right? And they say, okay, so if you take 5 million years ago and you quantify the number of mutations it would require for an ape to turn into a human, then basically that gives you a rate of change.
Yeah.
So let's say if 1,000 changes over 5 million years will give you X number of changes per however many years, right?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that becomes the established theoretical rate.
Okay.
Okay.
And so depending
That's called
on
the phylogenetic dating method.
So I'm going to try to break this down to layman's terms.
And Lemuels? And Lemuels, don't forget Lemuels.
And Lemuels,
Okay,
that's
right.
funny. I've never heard that. So essentially, if I understand correctly, you're able to, so DNA is an amalgamation of from multiple different places. That's why you can do the 21andMe? 23andMe,
yeah.
right? And you can find out that you have all these different types of DNA inside of you, right? Yeah. And so they're able to you're able to see in that DNA sequencing kind of how far down the ring that DNA was introduced.
Yeah, how many changes have been made?
How many changes have been made
They
since
call them
then.
mutations.
And so that's how they kind of see, this is at least this many generations ago is okay.
Yeah, based on that, okay? Mm-hmm. The only thing is what if we didn't actually come from apes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What if the time frame is wrong? Mm-hmm. These are all extrapolations that are foundational to the whole idea.
For sure.
But nobody was there. I mean, you can't actually do that, right? So, in order to try to tighten that up in the genetics field, actually, I can tell you all the quotes and so forth on this, but again, this would be a 2 or 3 hour long discussion. Yeah. So I'll just have to kind of paraphrase it. But bottom line is that they said, well, let's just try to see how fast the rate of mutation is in actual living populations. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happened was they took grandma, granddaughter, or grandma, mom, granddaughter, sequenced grandma's DNA, sequenced mom's DNA, sequenced granddaughter's DNA, and see if there's any changes in the mitochondrial DNA, which is being passed through each of those lines, each of those people, right?
What do they find?
Well, I mean, like 99% of the time, there's no change, right? I mean, over really 2 generations, there's no change. But every now and again, they would find one, right? There would be, look at this. This had a mutation in this particular area of the mitochondrial DNA that we could actually pick it up.
Measure.
Right? Mm-hmm. Well, now if you do that times 10, that would be one lineage.
Yeah.
Now you do that times 10,000 lineages. So you get 10,000 grandmothers, 10,000 mothers, and 10,000, and now all of a sudden
you get another level,
and you start to get some statistically significant numbers. Or in other words, so what is the rate that we actually find of how often does that actually change over the course of 1 or 2 generations? And it turns out it was 26 times faster than the theoretical rate.
Oh, interesting.
By the way, the theoretical rate is called phylogenetic dating. And this is called pedigree dating because you're actually using actual human beings and actually testing their DNA and seeing how fast it changes.
Who did this study?
It was Parsons, and there were some other people. It's been done several different times.
Okay.
But anyway, but the interesting thing was they said that rate is so different than the observed rate that we actually see is so different than the theoretical rate that we don't even know which rate we should apply when it comes down to DNA dating studies. And they actually, and I have the articles and so forth, where they're actually arguing back and forth which dating should we use? They're orders of magnitude off. They're different. They're so far different that it's like, how can we even rely on this?
Yeah, on either of them.
Right.
Okay, so
and which one do we use? The theoretical one, or do we use the actual observed one?
The actual observed
Because if we use the actual observed one, and this actually came out in the journal Science and also in another scientific journal, I said if we use the actual observed rate,
to throw so much out of the window.
well, this is what's interesting. They said that the most recent common maternal ancestor of all humans, instead of being 200,000 years ago, if you apply the observed rate, it puts it to 6,000 years ago. Would be the most the last common ancestor of all humans.
Okay, we got to get a source for this. We got to get the source.
Yeah, I have the sources right here.
Do you have the source on there? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can get into that when maybe if we kind of go
exciting.
through this. But actually, this is all in my in some DVDs that we already have out.
Let's put a pin in the biology lesson.
But isn't that awesome?
No, it's super interesting, and I'm super
it's not
excited
just
to dig
one;
into
it's
more.
two, and these are mainstream scientific, peer-reviewed journals.
Yeah.
They're saying, and then of course they say if we use the observed rate, it comes down to 6,000 years. But clearly, that can't be the case.
Okay, cool.
So they throw out the observed rate and go back to the theoretical rate because it matches what they want it to match more.
Okay, cool. So to kind of summarize and put a bow on this,
Yeah.
the generally accepted thing in the past has been all Native Americans come from an Asiatic descent, right?
Yeah.
But a new group has been found that is not Asiatic, that actually has its origin in Middle East, Northern Africa. And the critics say, well, the dating isn't right with the Book of Mormon.
Right, it's way before.
It's way before.
Yeah.
But then it's not so clear cut on how we even
What
date
scale you're
DNA,
using.
on what scale you're using. And so
Right, because if you apply the 26 times faster rate to the
brings it
what
closer.
what they thought, it brings it to about the haplogroup X showed up in America somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 years ago.
Okay, which is completely
But
different.
I have actual articles. They said originally well the haplogroup X showed up here 45,000 years ago, and there's another article I think it was like 25,000 years, and there's another one that came out and said no, we're thinking it's more closely to like about 12,000 years ago. Any of those are still way earlier than the Book of Mormon timeframes, but all of them are still based on the phylogenetic dating.
Yeah.
So if you apply the actual
The
rate,
observable date.
the observed rate to
It's
the
completely different.
time frame, it actually pushes it right down to about 2,400 years ago. The haplogroup X showed up here in North America, which is exactly what
a good time
Book of Mormon
period.
What's
So-
interesting to me is, like, for example, for those people that had their testimony affected by that DNA in the Book of Mormon video, it's like with all of this scientific data constantly changing with new research and better technology, it's like it just shows the importance of relying on our spiritual convictions like you have with your MTC experience, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And I think it's important to say, like, you know, we can never say, we can't just be so certain on either side of the argument. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like there is always that space there that has to be filled in with faith. Now, we choose to have faith in God, Jesus Christ, the restoration, the Book of Mormon. Other people choose to have faith in DNA sequencing, the theory of evolution. Whoever it is, we all have faith, and we can choose what we fill that little space of faith with, because it isn't so cut and dry.
And sometimes I think they call it more plausibility.
Yeah.
Because they don't talk about faith per se, but they say, is it possible? So for example, that's part of the reason why I did this book. It's called Rediscovering the Book of Mormon Remnant Through DNA.
Okay.
Okay, which you can actually go on our website. You can download the whole book for free.
Okay.
What's your website?
bookofmormonevidence.org. Just
Okay.
go to the downloads page and then just click on that, and you
Perfect.
and you can
yeah,
download.
well, I'll be in that for sure.
But this in this book, it actually, I mean, I have the quotes basically talking about the assumptions here, and in fact, I pulled it
Got
up
one
this
marked
morning
right
here.
Okay, good.
Okay, but this is an interesting thing about science, because people think that I'm anti-science, right?
Yeah.
And I am not. I love science. I love true science.
Yeah.
But there's so much people think that, just because science says something that makes it some kind of fact, right?
Yeah.
But scientists, like everyone else, have ideas, they have opinions, they have theories, they have agendas, that kind of thing. And science progresses. I mean, the peer review process is actually, normally it's a really good process if you really use it. But what happens is you get a bunch of people who all agree on the same thing. They become your peers, and then they rubber stamp anything you put on there.
And if something is
Right.
against what they've said, then that's the issue. All of their papers, like if you find a new discovery, like a legitimate discovery, like you can talk about the realm of Egyptology, for example. How much money has been made in writing textbooks about Egyptology and the way that everything was done. If you find something that contradicts, like, oh, let's say Egypt actually, the pyramids were built 11,000 years ago instead of 6,000 years ago. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, they got a lot more wrong than just that. You got to rewrite everything. And so it isn't a perfect system because human beings are prideful. And just because you're a scientist doesn't mean that you are, stripped of all your pride and ego. It's like, I just ask everybody, including us, ourselves, everyone in this room, like, we just have to be humble. Just don't be so certain that we know the truth about everything.
So much stuff we can talk about. What I want to ask you is, when did you go from believing Mesoamerican Geographic model guy to recovering, like you said?
Well, this is what happened.
Your words, not mine.
So doing all this DNA research, I was like, oh my gosh. So the only hope really of having any kind of evidence in support of the Book of Mormon is this haplogroup X. And so I got to, I figured that farms was going to probably be too, farms, their very logo is all about Mesoamerica, right? It's a Mayan glyph, okay? And if you look at their mission statement of the now defunct Farms organization, it was to show forth the evidences of the Book of Mormon as a Mesoamerican codex. So that was right in their mission statement.
That was in their mission statement.
That's their mission statement.
I didn't know that.
So that's what Magleby and others have, and Dan Peterson and Jack Welch and so forth. That was part of the Farms deal. That was their actual stated goal. Was to show the Book of Mormon as a Mesoamerican codex. Okay, so with that. So how do we end up getting over here? Well, basically, so the DNA thing was showing that these Algonquin tribes was the only hope for having any evidence for the Book of Mormon.
DNA.
Because down in Central and South America are all haplogroups C and D, which are already determined as Asian. When they sequenced the DNA from the Mayan kings down in Central America and Guatemala, they're all Asian. 100% Asian. So if there's any kind of a hope that we're going to somehow be able to find evidence that would actually support the Book of Mormon claims, then this was the only one. So I went to Farms. Well, I actually didn't go to Farms because I figured they're going to be too biased. So I went to what's their names? Fair Mormon at the time, and so I contacted Fair. Said, listen, I've got some awesome research. I'm too busy. I've got another life. This is just something I'll just pass it off to you. You guys can take it, and you take it to the church. Here it is. I'm going to just drop it right in your lap. You just take it. And instead, I was like shocked by the attacks. I got, oh my gosh, they just went after me like no other.
Really?
And I was like, whoa, hold on. So, and part of the reason was because I wasn't using the methodology that they had espoused, and that's why I wanted to talk maybe for a little bit about methodologies. Because that's been a big source of where the difference is between, and how I came to the
Mesoamerican
conclusion.
And the Heartland.
So basically, once I realized that the only hope that we have from a DNA standpoint of having any kind of evidence that actually would be supportive of the Book of Mormon. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that in this book, I say there is no, we don't have a hard and fast case. We don't even have
no smoking gun.
We don't even have a piece of tissue from Lehi or Sariah or Ishmael or like Ishmael's wife or anybody from that era. The best we can do is still an extrapolation because what was the population of Jerusalem at the time when Lehi left? What was the general population? And we can say that haplogroup X was in fact there in Jerusalem at 586 BC or 600 BC when they left, right? And it shows up here in the Americas, and again, there's still an extrapolation there. How did it get here? Was it the Book of Mormon story or some other story? But the bottom line is that it does at least lead to a preponderance of evidence in support of.
In a certain geographical area where the Algonquin.
But there's no absolute. You'd have to have a sequence of sequencing of DNA from one of the original
at
group,
that time,
right? And then sequence their ancestors later.
For sure.
And so the way that the Mesoamerica guys basically went at the DNA problem is they said, well, what happened is that the DNA when Lehi landed, they immediately assimilated into a larger, much more robust population of people in the Mayan, the Mayan culture, basically Mayan civilization, which we know archaeologically was already well established before Lehi arrived there at 600 BC, or that area. And so, as I said, what happened is that
the whole genetic drift argument essentially was just that over time their DNA got swallowed up by the predominant DNA, which is that of the Maya people.
Exactly. So it basically got diluted out of existence. I mean, every generation, that is not, Lehi's, it just gets less and less, and that's actually shown in some Icelandic populations and so forth. A few people show up, and within 2 or 3 generations, their DNA is, you almost can't even, recognize it or find it anymore, right? Because they're predominant DNA. The only problem is, does that follow the storyline of the Book of Mormon?
Not with the Nephites, at least. I mean, the Lamanites, you could maybe make the argument about the Lamanites. They go out in the world, they kind of mix up, and it seems like when you read the text of the Book of Mormon, it's like Nephites are the people who of the covenant, and then everybody else is a Lamanite almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's so funny because people try to say that that's that the whole Book of Mormon is racist because they're talking about the dark-skinned Lamanites and the light-skinned Nephites, and do they not realize that they're from the same parents?
Yeah.
This is not another race.
Yeah.
This is like 2 people of the same race that happen to have darker colored skin or lighter hair or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not a race issue. It's so funny that people call that a racist thing.
And also there can be a lot more into it in terms of like Hebrew storytelling and how they do stuff like that by using symbolism and things like that. But there's so many things that go.
But I mean, look at you two. You're brothers. You share a common parentage. But yet you have darker features and you have lighter features. You have like almost blue eyes and blonde hair. And you've got brown hair and brown. So, oh my goodness, you must be a different race.
Yeah.
Because you have different hair color.
Yeah.
That's how silly that argument is about the racism thing. And then the whole skin color thing basically is another thing we could go into a lot, but we don't need to at this point. Anyway, so back to what we're talking about. So essentially, I said, well, that everything I've been taught in seminary and institute talks about Central America. Even the Book of Mormon itself had pictures of Central America stuff in it when I was on my mission, right? And we would constantly be showing people, Ancient America Speaks or something. It was the old film strip, beep, and you'd do it, whatever, and it's all about Central America. And I'm like, okay, and so this went kind of right in the face of that. I'm like, whoa, there's no evidence in Central America. Anyway. But let me get back to the other part of it here because I didn't finish that little bit off there. So, bottom line, the Book of Mormon never says anything about another people out there. They say, well, it alludes to it because of this or that or kind of thing. You have Coriantumr, but that was 500 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, so this isn't. There's nothing in the Book of Mormon that establishes that they were assimilating into another culture. And in fact, that goes directly against the Jewish tradition of not marrying outside of your kindred.
Out of the covenant.
Right, out of your kindred. That's what Abraham and Isaac and getting Isaac a wife and so forth, that was what that was about. They had to marry within their people, basically, right?
Yeah, and I will say to this, though, that later on, as more converts, as their missionary efforts go, like the idea of them intermarrying with other groups, I don't think that's crazy. Because once they become a part of the covenant, you know what I mean? Then, I could see them intermarrying. But
but this is something that they're claiming happened early on.
Immediately.
When there was just a handful, maybe 50, 60 people, and that they assimilate into a Mayan culture that has, say, 20 or 30,000 people already established. And so that their DNA would be diminished and basically diluted out of existence.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't see that today. It is a legitimate argument if you want to ignore the Book of Mormon story. But you have to completely ignore the Book of Mormon story because the Nephites, they left the Lamanites, they went up and established the land of Nephi. If they were assimilating into another culture, why would they make? Okay, let's say this.
A new city. Why wouldn't they just go to the?
Well, why would they make Nephi the king?
Yeah.
Okay. that you got 20,000 people who are already established. These outsiders show up.
They're not going to make some random guy.
And then they go, oh, let's make him the king over all of the people. Okay, I know now it did kind of happen though with the Mulekites, but that's because they understood the Mulekites and the Nephites. You know, they knew that they were related, right? Okay, but bottom line, if it was the Mayan civilization, and here's Lehi and his family, they show up, and then Nephi and those who follow him go in the land northward, several days journey, or many days journey basically. And then now did they have to fight their way in? I mean, when they went in and established the land of Nephi, they had to displace other people, right? I mean, they had to fight their way in. There was battles and everything. No, there's none of that. They went up, they established the land of Nephi, they made Nephi the king, and they went about their lives, multiplying and replenishing on the promised land.
Yeah.
And they were even under a commandment not to intermarry with other people, but even not only their brothers. They weren't to intermarry with their brothers' families, with the Lamanites, right?
Yeah.
So they have very strict marriage restrictions here that are going on here. They're not going to just let anybody willy-nilly come in. And also, if you're a bunch of Mayans, and all of a sudden this Hebrew culture people come in and they have these weird things like circumcision and doing all these different laws of Moses stuff and killing the sheep and all that kind of stuff, right? How open are you going to be to we want to assimilate? Yeah, we're the majority people, but we want to assimilate into your culture. So all the men line up for your circumcisions. Let's get this done.
That's why
none of that.
That's why tribes. That's why tribes exist. That's why countries exist, because we have different beliefs,
different
cultures,
cultures,
different ways and cultures of life, and so we're like, this is my borders, these are your borders, and you do your thing. We're gonna do our thing. Yeah. And so
there's nothing in the Book of Mormon that indicates that they were assimilating at all with anybody. And in fact, just the opposite. They were specifically under a command not to assimilate with other people. So we can either assume A, they lived it and they didn't assimilate, or B, they basically broke the laws and their culture and assimilated into another civilization. The second one is the assumption that the Mesoamerican theory has to use to be able to explain the DNA.
For sure.
On the other hand, if you take the DNA and move it up into into the northeastern part of North America,
you're starting
those people
more solid ground.
Yeah, those people have DNA, and they already know that it's linked up to the Middle East. So you don't have to make up stuff.
Yeah. Other than DNA, what do you think are the strongest evidences that the Book of Mormon took place in North America?
Okay, well, and that's where we're going to go.
Yeah,
next.
let's get into it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what got me on my journey, right? Basically, the whole DNA thing, and I was going, well, okay, so if the DNA thing, but we know from the geography stuff that happened in Central America, how do we reconcile those two things, right? How does that actually work? And so I actually the very first thing I did. Let me pick this up real quick here. Good. And this is kind of funny because this is actually really quite funny, because I think there's a lot of people on the Mesoamerican side who, in fact, when you had Kirk Magleby on, his primary mode of coming to the conclusions that he does is that, well, the only thing that matters is the internal geography. The internal geography has to be accurate. Anything that's in the Book of Mormon, if it doesn't match up geographically with how we look at it and so forth, then we have to toss it out. And of course, his feeling is that the only internal geography that actually works is the Mesoamerican model. Okay, but they think, Rod, you should do that. Well, I did that years and years ago. Long before I ever even started this, I was interested in the geography enough that I actually spent a couple of months actually going through. This is a long time ago. This is before the internet.
Yeah.
Just kidding. No. Before Al Gore had invented the internet.
Yeah.
Anyway, so no, just kidding. This was after that, but this is it's confidential information and research. Rod Meldrum's research for Book of Mormon geography by first appearance, age, and referencing.
Holy cow!
So I took every single city, and I don't know if you can see this or not on the camera here. Like this is Zarahemla, right? Okay. And then I have every geographical feature. So this is Nephi, Lehi Nephi, Shemlon, Mormon, Amulon, Helam, Shilem, Ishmael, desolation, bountiful, anti-Nephi, lehi, Sidon River, East Wilderness, narrow strip of land, East Sea,
So you got it all.
West Sea,
Yeah,
Jershon, Jerusalem.
How long
Middoni.
did this take you?
It took months. And what I did basically is I made this, it's a Word document, because I didn't know how to use Excel at the time.
Yeah.
So it's all in columns. But basically the first column is the first recorded appearance, or the date of the first recorded appearance of that word, which is this. In the case, it's 87 BC in Alma chapter 2, verse 26. Is the first time the word Zarahemla is used in the Book of Mormon. The last recorded appearance of the date. Any destruction or rebuilding or anything, notes about what happened to that city. So in here we have, it was destroyed by fire in AD 33 to 34, and that's in 3 Nephi chapters 9 and 3 Nephi chapter 8 and whatever. Then there's any cities and lands in the general area notes. So Zarahemla is close to Nephi, which is nearly surrounded by water. In the heart of their lands, it was the head of the river, close to the head of the river Sidon. The hill Amnihu, the river Sidon ran by it. And so forth. And have cities, lands nearby sharing borders, but the direction is unknown.
Yeah, so the thing that I'm taking note here, and one thing that I'd love to talk more to Kirk about, and I'd love to get everyone in a room together. That would be a good time if they would be willing to do it.
It would be awesome.
I think that one thing that's interesting is a lot of the geographical references happen prior 3rd Nephi. Like the majority of them happened prior 3rd Nephi. And one of the core principles that Kirk Magleby put forward in terms of his methodology was that they assumed that the changes in the land weren't big enough to change the geography enough, like the internal model.
And I agree with him on that.
Yeah. Do you really?
Yeah. Because we've been able to actually isolate the actual event geologically in the heartland of America that was actually experienced at the time of Nephi and the coming of Christ.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But So bottom line is so what I did was, and this is what the problem is. So I did all this. It also has these other columns for cities and lands that are to the north, cities and lands to the south, cities and lands to the east, cities and lands to the west. Okay. And then I would fill all of this stuff out, and it took, like I said, months and months and months to do this. And then I said, okay, I'm going to figure this out because I know Photoshop, right? And so I took and just made each a name, and I could just move it anywhere on just a blank screen, right? So I just put, here's Zarahemla, Nephi, whatever, put all these different things and just put them all on there. And then using this, I started to arrange them in how it actually would work, right? And no matter how hard I tried, I could not figure out how the thing worked. I kept trying for months. I kept trying to work this out to do this. And then I started realizing that one of the problems is that when we read the scriptures, we have to interpret them in some fashion, right? I mean, so it says, it was like as an example, it talks about many days' journey, right? Well, how many is many days' journey? Well, I looked it up, and one time it talked about it was many days' journey, and it turns out it was about 3 or 4 days. Another time it says, and he did live many days, and then he died. So it was an entire lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere between about 4 or 5 days and a lifetime is how many days' journey is.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so how are you going to narrow anything down with that? Though there's too many things. The other thing I think is interesting, I hope someday if we ever get the 116 pages back, the first 4 or 5 pages are the map section.
That would be nice.
That would be sweet.
I was thinking about
refer to map B, you refer to map C. Also remember that each one of these prophets in the Book of Mormon, as they were writing their particular portions, their particular accounts, they were doing it from the perspective of where they were living.
Yeah.
So Nephi, who started off over in Jerusalem, his perspective of where they were and their lands would be very different than the last Moroni, who was primarily up in...
And they didn't have Google Earth. They literally just had... They could climb a tall tree or go up on a mountain and see that way. But there wasn't... I think a lot of times we have such a high view of everything with our Google Maps, our Google Earth, all this stuff. And it's like they just didn't have that. They're just... people.
Yeah, and we look at a globe and we go, oh, look there's a narrow neck. Dang. The Book of Mormon says there's a narrow neck. That must be the one. And we completely ignore the fact that in the narrow neck of land of the Book of Mormon, it says that the Nephite could cross it in a day. Well, if you look at the Panama, basically where the narrowest part between North and South America is, it's like 40 miles, and it's all marshes and swamps. And there's no way that anybody's crossing that in a day on foot, right?
Yeah.
So you have to actually look at the other internal consistencies. I mean, could you cross that? Is there a narrow neck that could be crossed in a day on foot? Where is it at? What is it between? And then it talks about narrow passages and so forth. Are they the same place? There's all kinds of assumptions that go on with that.
So if I get what you're saying,
and interpretations, which have led to over 150 different geographies for the Book of Mormon that have been established using this method that Kurt is a huge proponent of.
Yeah.
And that's this book right here.
An Ancient American Setting
for the Book of Mormon by John Sorensen. It was considered kind of the Bible, the Book of Mormon geography for a long time. But this is where I have a problem.
Yeah.
If you have a methodology in science that produces over 150 different theories about what's really going on, how well is that working to narrow it down to the truth?
Yeah.
Right? It's not working. There's 150 different geographies that have been proposed for the Book of Mormon. And so I said, well, okay, so that sounds like it's a methodology problem.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's just not enough information in the Book of Mormon to positively identify every single thing here in such a way that it can all work together, because no matter how hard I tried to make it work together, I couldn't make it work.
I guess what I'm saying, if I'm trying to understand correctly, what you're saying is that although the Book of Mormon is geographically, consistent, there is enough ambiguity in the text where it's like you can't use it like a textbook perfectly, right? And so there has to be other sources that you use outside of the Book of Mormon.
I'm going to give you a really great example of that too, like the word head, head of the river Sidon, for example. Okay, but let me just show you though, because this became one of my major things, because I knew that being consistent with the internal geography is important, it's critical, but it depends on how you interpret it.
Yes.
And just like figures don't lie, but liars can figure. Okay, I'm not calling anybody a liar, but I'm just saying that two people can look at the same passage and argue for completely two different things.
It's the same thing with evangelicals, and like when we talk to evangelicals, it's like we're talking about the same scripture, and the thing that I get from them a lot of times is like, well, this is what the Bible says, and I'm like, well, no, that's how you're interpreting it.
Exactly.
We interpret it differently.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if Kirk Magleby has been able to make a case for his geography based on the internal thing, you can't tell me that there's not some scriptures that he's interpreting a certain way to help it fit his preconceived
which is fine, because everyone does that.
Right. But you can't basically say that that's the only way.
It's objective.
Right.
That's the issue. Is it's like, just be straightforward. This is my interpretation. Here's very clearly, this is what I'm interpreting. These seem like they're pretty good objective facts and not.
And when it comes down to science, the more that you have outside things that also point to the same conclusion. Okay, so for example, I mean that's the reason why in those DNA studies you can't just take one grandma, mom, and granddaughter and say, okay, that's the race.
That's it. Just
because 99% of the time it's going to be the same between all three, right? Okay, so you can't do that. You have to have other things that all corroborate together to point to the same thing. Now, people are going to say, well, I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth, because in science, the dating of the Earth, the evolution and all that kind of stuff, that's all, by multiple different scientific things. But it's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of, maybe one of the reasons why Lehi had that his vision, his dream, where there was a great and spacious building, right? And if you remember, what was the foundations of the great and spacious building?
Nothing.
It was standing, as it were, in the air. Is that reality? Do huge buildings stand in the air? No, this is like an apparition. This is not reality. But yet the people who were in the building believed in it so thoroughly and completely that they were willing to actually mock the people who were down on the ground, taking of the tree of life. Which, by the way, the tree is actually attached to the ground. It's real. Okay, it's a reality thing.
Yeah.
And they were mocking them.
Yeah.
thinking that they're on some kind of solid ground, solid basis, when in fact it's the freaking house of cards.
Yeah.
I mean, and all it takes is for one or two of those foundational pillars to be wrong, and the whole thing goes down, because it's all been a bunch of, I like to call them, in some peer-reviewed journals, which we'll get into that a little bit later possibly, but it's kind of like backslapping buddy peer review. The purpose of real peer review is to have people who have opposite points of view of yours to go through and see, okay, are you just taking a lot of liberties, or am I holding you to it, right?
But now it's like are you part of the group? We'll check to see if you're part of the group, and then you're
in. And if you want to know how that all works, basically, it all comes down to funding.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're going to go against the predominant ideas and ideologies and assumptions of modern science, how are you going to get funded?
Yeah.
Because by their own internal, this was just several years ago, and I think they just did another one just a couple of years ago, but by their own internal surveys, the three biggest scientific organizations in the United States, I think that's the NSF, I lovingly call them the non-sufficient funds. No, it's the National Science Foundation. The AAAS, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the NAS, is the National Academy of Sciences. Those three organizations basically control the purse strings of where money that's coming from the United States government gets funneled
allocated
out
to labs and things like that.
And by their own internal surveys, they're over 98% atheists.
Yeah.
So if you think that you're going to get funding from any one of these three organizations when all of their hierarchy are atheists, and you're going to try to do something that would actually go against their pet theories, are you going to get funding from that?
Yeah, no.
No way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, going back to the Tree of Life thing, is that they say it's the pride of the world, right? And as I was saying earlier, we all just need to take a freaking piece of humble pie and just realize we don't know everything. And that's even like when it comes to Book of Mormon geography, when it comes to any of it, it's just like, yes, let's look into this stuff. Let's have our opinions. But then at the end of the day, if we're presented with data that is contrary to our opinion, that's better, be willing to adopt it.
Yeah.
You know,
so
really
I've
cool.
actually had people. I've told people who are close around me and so forth. I said, if you ever catch me more interested in defending my position than in finding the truth, then you call me out.
Yeah.
Because when you basically are more interested in defending your position, that's a pride position.
That's when you start floating up in that building.
Right.
So.
But just because somebody says that they've debunked your research doesn't necessarily mean it's debunked, right? I mean, it depends on what they bring to the table. If somebody says, "Well, your church is false," I've debunked it.
Yeah.
I mean.
So let's go into
the methodology.
Let's go into the methodology for a second, and then let's get into the actual findings that you've had in kind of your geographic model.
Yeah. So let me so the basic idea was, and this is actually from John Sorensen. This is from Mormon's Map, which was published in 2000 on page 4. He says, what logically would seem to be one of the first steps is a systematic systematic investigation is to construct a map of the American land of promise based solely on statements in the scripture. There's at least 550 passages are relevant, and it seems not to have occurred to anyone during the church's first century. So that was his thought.
What you started off doing that you're talking about. Like you had all that data
and I think,
you were trying to do.
I don't think that that's accurate. I think there's been a lot of people who have done that and probably came to the same conclusion that I did, is there's just not enough geographic information to positively identify every place. But just to kind of give you an idea, so what happened was, this is John Sorensen's book, An Ancient American Setting for the Book of Mormon. I'm going to just turn here to page 1, okay? And right here, so you can read this part right here. Says that, you want me to read it?
I'll read it.
Okay,
the historical sources give no indication that Moroni's instructions to young Joseph Smith included geography, nor did Joseph Smith claim inspiration on the matter. Ideas he later expressed about the location of events reported in the book apparently reflected his own best thinking.
Page 1. So basically what he's saying is that we made an internal map. And basically, Joseph Smith was essentially ignorant about the geography of the Book of Mormon, right? He says basically, He says that young Joseph Smith says no indication that Moroni's instructions gave anything about geography.
Mm-hmm.
He says, nor did Joseph Smith claim inspiration on the matter.
Mm-hmm.
I can show you accounts where I think I can directly refute that particular statement.
Well, let's actually do that, because I think this is the crux between the Heartland and the Mesoamerica. This is the point of contention.
This is one of several.
Because we have a lot of friends who espouse the Mesoamerican model, and they're always like, I don't want to have a conversation if I'm just going to be said, you don't believe the prophets. You don't believe the prophets. Because there is that side from the Heartland. They're like, you don't believe the prophets.
That are a little too extreme.
That are a little bit too extreme. Mm-hmm. Where I think it's just like, let's talk about it. Because as far as I know, there is no evidence that Moroni talked about geography with Joseph Smith. Like, there's no evidence. Okay. And I'm not sure of any situations where Joseph Smith said that he was inspired on where it happened. Like, you have Zelf's
I'll give you
let's get into it, because I want to know.
Give us some
examples. Let's do it right
now. Okay, so, all right, but he says it apparently reflected his own best thinking. In other words, Joseph Smith speculated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you a couple of, okay, so let's just go into the methodology here for just a second. Okay, so the first step would be to take the internal geography and do that, right? Mm-hmm. But that's led to over 550 different passages in the Book of Mormon, or not passages, but over 150 different geographies.
Yep.
This is a flawed, failed method. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not working. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the, in the burned over district of New York, you had all these people coming and talking about their different, their different, the Methodists and all of the different other churches that were there, coming and presenting their information, but they're all using the same book, right? So there's a massive confusion, is what Joseph Smith said, and there's a massive confusion on the geography stuff. So what I did is I actually said, this is the John Sorensen. I mean, again, right on page, well, it's right here in the beginning of the book here. The one thing that he's basically showing here is, he's showing Mesoamerica, obviously, here first, right? But he basically says we know there's this thing called the narrow neck of land, and everything has to revolve around that. Despite the fact that the narrow neck of land wasn't even mentioned for the first 500 years of the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. It's a geographic feature that wasn't even mentioned until long after the Nephites had already moved into the land of first inheritance, and then from there to the land of Nephi, from there to the land of Zarahemla, and so forth. It was mentioned when they got to the land bountiful area.
Yeah.
So it's not even a primary feature of the Book of Mormon, this narrow neck of land thing. Okay, so it is a feature, and it has to be accounted for, but where? So if it's not working in practice, is there another method? Okay, and this is George Q. Cannon in the Book of Mormon Geography and Juvenile Instructor. This is back in 1890. It says, simply because the Book of Mormon is not a geographical primer, it was not written to teach geographical truths, and nowhere gives us the exact situation or boundary so that it can be definitively located without fear of error. Okay, so if this method is not working that well, is there a better method? Okay, so that's basically, probably we ought to start with what the Book of Mormon was originally intended for. Mm-hmm. Was the Book of Mormon written for its geography? Mm-mm. No. What was it written for? It was written for its prophecies and its promises to a latter-day nation that was going to be established and lifted up and raised up on their lands in the last days. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So if that's the primary purpose, was it for geographical information or prophecies and promises?
Prophecies and promises.
Is it possible we can learn more about the geography by studying the prophecies and the promises than we can about the geographical passages, which are incomplete, and we have 116 pages that are even gone, right? Is it clearer that way? Another thing, if you're looking at a scientific method, the more diverse ways you can look at the same problem and then see if it all matches up, the more robust your method is, right? Okay, so you need to look at all kinds of things. You need to look at linguistics. You need to look at archaeology. To me, one of the most important things is, what did Joseph Smith know? Did he know anything? Did he give us any clues? And the Mesoamerica guys say, well, no, he translated the record, but basically he didn't really know much about it, right? Which goes exactly against what his mom said. Lucy Mack Smith said about Joseph Smith that they would get the family together during the evenings, and he would regale them with stories about the Book of Mormon, and tell them about the animals that they rode, and even right down to their very laws, she said, right? and all kinds of information about the Book of Mormon. And the interesting thing was, he was doing this before he even had the plates.
Mm-hmm.
So where was he getting the information from?
Mm-hmm.
It's inferred from
Moroni.
Yeah, and it's not just from the one night.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
He was getting
Every
instructed
year
every year,
mm-hmm.
right? So I mean, what is the chances that Joseph Smith was completely ignorant about the whole geography and where it happened?
Mm-hmm. And that's always been an argument that I gave. Like when in the Kirk Magleby interview, I talked about that. I was just like, you think in all the hours that he was talking to Moroni, they didn't say one thing about it?
He was clueless about that, right?
Yeah.
And especially when they talk about the plants and the animals and so
agree.
forth in the Book of Mormon, and those plants and animals don't even exist in Central America, but every single one of them are indigenous to North America.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't. So you have to look at animals, you have to look at migration patterns, you have to look at weather patterns and climate, you have to look at all of these different things, but which one of those is the most robust? Well, if you're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, don't you kind of have to take Joseph Smith's statements and the prophecies in the Book of Mormon as kind of the first and foremost, even over the geography passages, because maybe Moroni, the last guy, when he's abridging everything, maybe he doesn't know the geography of Nephi the same way that Nephi understood.
Yeah, because he probably never...
Because he was
never
down
in
there.
First Inheritance, probably.
Right.
And so like for him to know the whole perfectly, you know, from beginning until end, 1,000 years worth of traveling and wars and cities being destroyed and new cities being built, like the probability that he was able to keep that all completely straight is pretty low.
And I like how you articulated this, because I always saw that difference, that the people in Mesoamerica, well, the people that proposed that theory focused a lot on just the geography, and then those that believe that espouse the Heartland theory focus more on the prophecies contained in the Book of Mormon. But like, it totally makes sense, I guess, to me now to focus more on those prophecies, because that is the intended purpose of the Book of Mormon, to be a prophetic piece of writing.
And also, I mean, Moroni claimed, he says, Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know you're doing. He didn't say Jesus Christ has shown me the geography, and I know where it was. You know, I mean, bottom line is that he understood the prophecies, he understood the nation it was going to go to, he understood all of these things because he was shown that by Christ. And so he actually abridged their record into the Book of Mormon with the understanding of that this is what we're going to need.
Yeah. So the prophecies that you are referencing are probably 1 Nephi 13, talking about
the whole slew of them.
The whole slew of them, and there's tons of them. Ether as well. You know, talks about this being a land of freedom for all those who worship the God of the land, which is Jesus Christ. So one thing I want to push back on, because I want to hear what you say, and I always like to try to represent the Mesoamericans when Heartlanders here and vice versa.
Sure.
So you believe in a limited geography, right? Like it wasn't coast to coast. Nephites, coast to coast in the Book of Mormon, right?
Correct, yeah.
So
I think the Mesoamerica guys got that right.
Yes.
Through a study of the internal things, I mean, you don't have journeys of thousands of miles. I mean, you know, Alma goes on journeys and other people go on journeys. And
you have many days, but
you know, a few days, a few hundred miles maybe. But how limited is it?
But how limited is it? That's the question.
And then they go into a lot of about, you know, well, how far can a person, you know, do? I mean, and I did a tremendous amount of research on that. I mean, everything from, you know, how far do the hand carts go on an average day, to how far can you go in a wagon, and how far can you go on foot, and what about ultra runners? I mean, ultra runners will run 100 miles. I have a son who's an ultra runner, and they'll run 100 miles in less than 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
So. But
okay, so but I guess
exceptional.
Moving forward, but moving forward with this idea, so there's these prophecies that this land will be a place of liberty. So what I'm saying is, like, from the Mesoamerican point of view, from, you know, the tip of Canada all the way down to Argentina, that's all one land. The only thing we did was we split Panama, but that's it. It's all one land. And so, because even from your point of view, the Heartland point of view, the Book of Mormon only took place in a very specific area. So does that mean the prophecy doesn't?
It's about 10 times bigger than the Mesoamerica area. The Mesoamerica area is really surprisingly small. It's about half of Utah. Kind of as a general area.
So when it comes to the parameters of these prophecies, when it says this land, is it only the land where the Book of Mormon was taking place? Because the borders of the United States of America didn't exist back then.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that the whole continent from top of Canada to the bottom of South America
Could be this
is
land.
one land.
Yeah. Yes.
And so that's why I don't get the kind of like the dogmatic, it has to, and trust me, I'm a patriot. Like we're patriots.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know.
We love America.
Yeah.
We love the
As do
founding
I.
of the nation. And
I don't not love Mexico or
Yes.
Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
That's
whatever.
another thing. Thank you for specifying.
yes, that's really good.
It's like those Canadians.
But I feel like there is this kind of dogmatic, because America is awesome, the Book of Mormon has to have all happened inside of America.
Yeah, they
where
call
it's
it
just
nationalistic, jingoistic. They call it thing. They try to say that we're trying to play on people's nationalism in the United States and so forth.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you're trying to play that. But what I'm saying is, why is that argumentation that I just put forward? Why is that flawed?
Okay. Because there's limitations.
What are those limitations exactly?
Yeah, let me kind of go through some of those limitations in that. So as an example, in doing the research on the prophecies and promises, if the Book of Mormon was in fact written for its prophecies and promises, then what are they? I couldn't find any books where anybody had written specifically about what the prophecies are in the Book of Mormon. And it turns out that there are 36 very specific prophecies and promises. It says, this is from Doctrine and Covenants chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. And verse 19 it says, verse 18 says, and this testimony shall come to the knowledge of the Lamanites, Lemanites, and Ishmaelites, right? Then verse 19 says, and for this very purpose are these plates preserved. So now he's going to tell us what the purpose was, why the plates were preserved. He says that the promises of the Lord might be fulfilled, which he made to his people, and that the Lamanites might come to the knowledge of their fathers, and they might know the promises of the Lord. They might believe in the gospel and so forth. Okay, so it's about the prophecies, right? Yeah. Okay, and then this is so it's preserved for the purpose of actually letting people know where these prophecies are, and then should the proposed method use the geographical passages over the spiritual passages? In other words, do the geography passages in the Book of Mormon, are they more robust? Should we rely on them more so than the spiritual passages in the Book of Mormon? And I think the answer, of course, is no. And is it possible we can learn more about the geography by studying those prophecies than we can that? So I have a whole thing about paradigms.
Yeah.
We don't need to go into all that, but anyway, basically it's a pair of dimes. Okay, and how much is a dime worth? Real quick.
10 cents.
10 cents, right?
How much is 10 cents worth?
Okay, yeah. Well,
and it just goes
with
forever.
inflation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But bottom line, is it 20 cents? Then 2 dimes is worth 20 cents? Actually, not, because these particular dimes I'm showing here are 1964 dimes, which are about 97% silver. They're worth about $7 or $8 now. So if you took 2 of these 1964 dimes out and you paid for something and you got 20 cents worth of value out of it, you lost
got cheated.
About 20 times more than what it's actually worth, because what you didn't know was those were silver, right? So that's what they call a pair of dimes change. Okay.
Yeah. I like it.
So anyway, I've been doing this for years with that particular one, so probably people have seen that already. But anyway, so the law of witnesses, you have spiritual witnesses and you have physical witness. And that's an important one also. We don't have time to get into all that, but I'll just get to the point here. So basically, the new method for conducting research on the Book of Mormon geography that I came up with, this is from a DVD that I released in 2007.
Yeah.
2008. So this is like
back
a long
DVDs
time
were a
ago,
thing.
right? This is back when DVDs were actually.
My kid will never see a DVD.
Yeah, probably never see a DVD. Yeah, that's right. So to me, the most important thing is you put the scriptural prophecies and promises first. Those are the least prone to private interpretation. I mean, because there's a slew of them. Okay. Then I wanted to look at, what did Joseph Smith know about this? What were is there any prophetic statements? Did he have any opinion about any of this stuff? Then I want to look at the physical evidences, like the DNA, archaeology, culture, language, civilization, archaeoastronomy, metallurgy, building practices, materials, burials, climate, weather, animals. I mean, all of that kind of stuff. Does that play into it? Do all of those different things all point to a specific geography or not? And if you have all of those things pointing to a specific geography, doesn't that make it a lot more robust than just one thing saying this is where it is? Right? So that's why. So you have to have a much more robust methodology, which is what I basically started the whole Heartland thing by using this methodology. And then fourth, is the geographic passages from the Book of Mormon. Is it possible that we are interpreting things incorrectly, and when we have all of these other things pointing to a particular location, can we look at the geography passages and rethink them with a different interpretation that actually now makes sense? So I'll give you one quick example of that. So Kirk Magleby gave the example of the River Sidon. Okay, so I actually brought a couple of books here so you can take a look at it here.
Cool.
So this is a...
So yeah, in my scriptures right here, it says Sidon River, most prominent river in Nephite territory, runs north to the sea.
Yeah, it's right there in black and white.
Yeah,
right? I mean there it is. I mean
it runs north.
So
which
basically,
the Mississippi doesn't.
So the Mississippi runs exactly opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, okay, but I've never read, of all the times I've read the Book of Mormon and studied this whole thing, I've never read anything where it says it runs north. You know, so I actually had to find out, so why do they think that the River Sidon runs north? So I actually got a hold of Mace America friends of mine and said, why, where does it say that?
Yeah.
Say, well, it is a little bit of an extrapolation, and it has to do with the city of Manti, the head of the River Sidon, and the city of Zarahemla. So what we do know from the Book of Mormon is that the land of Zarahemla, or the city of Zarahemla, basically, the River Sidon runs on its east side. So Zarahemla's on the west side of the River Sidon.
Okay.
Okay. We know it has east and west banks. Okay. So in fact, let me pull this out, because this is kind of the master blaster when it comes to this stuff. I just have things.
We got one of those.
Yeah. Which, by the way, we've been. This has been out of print now for
a long time.
Over 2 years now.
Yeah. Wow.
Costco cleaned this all out, and then there's so many things I want to update this with new information that this came out.
Shout out to the Clark family who gave us one, even though it's out of print.
There we go. So anyway, so this was done like years and years ago, but in this, you know, I'm actually. Our conversation is literally following the book, right? So that, you know, so for example, you know, the prophecies and so forth. Let me just kind of go through a couple of quick things so that those okay, no, let's go ahead and finish.
Let's go to Sidon.
Okay,
let's go to
Sidon.
Sidon
Thing. So basically, if you look back in here a little bit more, you get into
Rod gets excited and he wants to jump
rivers
back and forth.
And
we
stuff.
gotta keep you focused.
Well, there's so much stuff.
I know.
It's hard to do. Anyway, so bodies of water. So I have a whole section on water and that kind of stuff, right? So let's go to right here. Okay, so basically, these nice ocean voyages covered, old world seas, you know, what constitutes a sea, you know, what are the Hebrew word for sea, what does that mean in the Hebrew, talking about bodies of water, and then right here we're going to get into the Mississippi River. Okay. So in the Book of Mormon, it does talk about east and west banks of the River Sidon. So basically, it says what we do know is that the River Sidon had east and west banks. Talks about the east bank and Alma. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scriptures that talk about an east bank, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 scriptures that talk about a west bank.
Okay, so we do know north to south orientation.
Right. Okay, and basically what we do also know is that Zarahemla, you know, the River Sidon flowed past Zarahemla on its west side. It says that the land of Manti is where the head of the River Sidon is. Okay. And it's pretty clear from the scriptures that the land of Manti is south of Zarahemla. Okay. So if Manti, let's say, is south and Zarahemla is here, and this is the head of the River Sidon, and then it flows past Zarahemla, and Zarahemla is on the north, then what direction is the river flowing?
It has to go north to south.
It's a north flowing river.
Or south to north.
Yeah, south to north, because Manti is, right?
Yep.
That all comes down to a definition.
Of what head is.
What is a head of a river? Okay, and what I find is fascinating. So I went back to, okay, what was the term head used for in Joseph Smith's day? What would Joseph Smith use the head for? If he was doing a translation of this, what would it be? And so I went back to Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary and looked up the word head.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
and what it basically says, head, it says the principal source of a stream as the head of the Nile. And the second definition states simply conflux. So there's
What's
two
a
different
conflux?
potential definitions. A search under conflux reveals sea confluence.
Okay. So,
So
a confluence
head-
of rivers is when multiple rivers meet.
Where rivers join.
We're joined.
Right. Okay. The word conflux is designed as a flowing together, the meeting or junction of two or more streams of water or other fluid, also the place of meeting as the confluence of the Tigris and the Euphrates, or the Euphrates, or the Ohio and the Mississippi.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, so it depends on which of those definitions you want to use.
So the point is, once again, to your point, is there's interpretation involved.
Right.
Yes.
So what happened is I wrote a white paper.
So it's not so
I
straightforward.
got it to a friend of mine who is a general authority, and
Yeah.
he got it to the Scriptures Committee. I said, there is no place where it positively identifies the river Sidon flowing north. It's an extrapolation based on where the head of the river is by Manti and where the
Based on-
Zarahemla is. And it's a good, if it is where the principal source of a river is, then it does make perfect sense. It would be a north flowing river. On the other hand, if it's a confluence, and it specifically says that the head, a confluence basically is talking about a confluence here being the Ohio and the Mississippi, and that's a conflux, which is also one of the definitions of head.
Of head.
Then that actually makes it the river flowing from
So Zarahemla's
Zarahemla
up here.
south down to the confluence at Manti.
Which, how far is that? Where does the Ohio and Mississippi meet?
The bottom of Illinois.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
so basically, and the river actually creates the boundaries of several states back there. Okay, so if that's a conflux definition, then that makes it a south-flowing river. Okay, and so I wrote this paper up, got it to the script, ended up getting to the scriptures department, and the scriptures department looked at it, and they looked at it and they said, you know what, you're right. There's no place where it says the river Sidon
So
flows
you got them to
north.
edit it out of the scriptures?
Pull
now the
your
new one.
phone out.
Pull your phone out.
I'm pulling my phone out right
Pull your scriptures out
No
on your
shot.
phone.
What year did you do this?
It's probably been about 7 or 8 years ago now.
Okay.
And you look up under Book of Mormon index, triple combination index, under study helps, usually I think it is. And you look up Sidon and see what they did, because now the flowing north thing, that wasn't in the versions until after my mission, okay, which was like in 1982, 83. So sometime after that
Let me help
Honestly,
is
here's
when
the thing.
they came out with this edition, here, which talks about it being a north flowing river. And then after this white paper came out, then basically they made another change, and so now you'll see that they've gone back to what the original Book of Mormon had. They've taken out the part.
They've taken out that part. Interesting.
So
Real quick, if
find it
anyone
real
from the
quick?
church is watching this, fix your search bar in the gospel app. It's so bad. When you search words,
It's a
it's
little
so
frustrating.
bad. It's so
a little
bad.
frustrating,
Just
but-
make it so if there's a word in the scriptures and I type that word in, then it pulls up every verse with that word in it, because that's not how
That's
it
what you're
works.
looking
And
for.
I don't know why. So yeah, what does
Gosh
it say now?
dang, bro. It says Sidon River, most prominent river in Nephite territory. End of sentence.
End of
Period.
sentence, period.
So they specifically remove the part about it flowing north to a sea, because there's no place in the Book of Mormon that definitively says that it did.
Dude, remember when we were talking to Kirk Magleby, and he had us look back to...
Yeah, he looked
Yeah.
at
He handed you
an
the
older-
scripture that he knew was going to be in there.
Yeah, and not the newer ones.
But why did he not tell you that the church is taking it out again?
yeah.
Maybe
So yeah.
he doesn't know that.
No, he knows that, obviously.
He knows that.
But
He was
but
specifically leading you
I
guys
know.
down a path
And this is
to
what
believe that
needs
the
to be
church's
fixed.
position is still that that's the case, and
this,
that's not.
Yeah, and this is what needs to be fixed in this conversation. Everyone just needs to be humble. Like, just say there's two prevailing theories. I espouse this one.
Yeah.
But the other one, this is their argument. But there's never that. There's never that. It's always, and I'm talking
Well, I
from
usually
both
know
sides.
their argument. I
Yes.
just explained their argument.
Yes,
Right.
but I will say that from both sides, I always get, well, it's because they're stupid. It's because, and that's coming from both sides. And it's just like, guys, why don't you just say, this is my theory, here's the other people's theory.
Yeah.
Make a decision. Like, it doesn't have to be this demeaning of the other side
when
on
you
both sides of
deliberately
this.
leave out things that go against your theory, don't you find that a little problematic?
Yeah. And everyone's got to do that, and I've heard it on both sides of the conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we had this conversation. It was good that we were able to get the side from Kirk on that side, and then hear it from this side, so that you guys can make a decision for yourself.
Yeah. But that's a quick example, though. I could give you dozens of examples like that.
Well, yeah, one thing that I want to talk about, so second on your list here is Joseph Smith's prophetic and revelatory statements. I really want to go back to where you were saying that you can show us instances in which Joseph Smith did make an inspired statement.
Okay. Should I even go above Joseph Smith's head?
I don't know. Go. Are you gonna go to Jesus? you're gonna pull out Jesus? All right. Let's see.
All right. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do we or do we not believe the Doctrine and Covenants were real, actual revelations from the Lord Jesus Christ to Joseph Smith?
I believe
we do.
Okay. Then take a look at...
It's about to get wild, I think.
Take a look at... go to Doctrine and Covenants, section 28.
Okay, 28.
Okay. And by the way, this is all in the first part of my book here. Okay.
Guys, I hope you like these mics. I hope they're not too distracting. We just... we got complaints on audio, and we just want to make the best auditory experience for all of you. Okay, D&C 28.
Verse what?
Okay, let's take a look here. So, and you can read that. So, it's basically, this is the Lord. Okay, this is in, let's see, this is in, New York in 1830. So this is just after the Book of Mormon was just coming out and so forth. He says, verse 1, "Behold, I say unto you, Oliver," he's talking to Oliver Cowdery. This is the revelation to him.
Yeah.
And he basically says, so that verse 8, "And now behold, I say unto you that you shall go unto the Lamanites and preach my gospel unto them, and inasmuch as you receive thy teaching, they shall cause my church to be established among them, and thou shalt have revelations, but write them not by way of commandment." So basically he's sending Oliver Cowdery to the Lamanites. Now this term Lamanites, is that the Lord's term or is that Joseph Smith's term?
The Lord's.
The Lord's in that.
I think that's the Lord's term.
Okay.
Okay, but the Mesoamerican guys say, well, no, that's just Joseph Smith's term.
Calling them the Native Americans
right,
the Lamanites.
The people, the Lamanites. Okay. Now let's turn to 28 and 30. Anyway, so he's basically calling Peter Whitmer Jr. also. Then section 32, Parley P. Pratt, it says, "And now concerning my servant Parley P. Pratt, behold, I say unto you, that learn my gospel," and so forth. "And what I have appointed unto him is he shall go with my servants Oliver Cowdery and Peter Whitmer Jr. into the wilderness among the Lamanites." Okay. And this is interesting. "And Ziba Peterson also shall go with them." So that's, you got Oliver Cowdery, Peter Whitmer Jr., Parley P. Pratt, and Ziba Peterson. And then who's this? There's another person he's going to go with them.
"And I myself will go with you." With them, and be in their midst, and I am their advocate with the Father, and nothing shall prevail.
Jesus.
So who is this other person?
It's Jesus.
So that's Christ, right?
So this is Christ's words saying that they're the Lamanites.
Well, yeah, and he
says,
says,
where was this? Where is among the Lamanites? Where is that?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Central America.
So
right?
this was the interesting thing. So I became very interested and say, wait, hold on now, hang on just a second. So, so he's got the first 4 missionaries. The very first copies of the Book of Mormon are now just barely coming off the Grandin press. And the Lord now, not Joseph Smith, but the Lord is telling Joseph Smith that he's got to send these 4 missionaries, the first missionaries ever called in this dispensation, right?
To the Lamanites.
To go to people that the Lord calls Lamanites. Now let me ask you a question. Do either one of you believe that the Lord knows who the Lamanites are and where they're located?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if you believe, then you got to know that the Lord knows who these people are and where they're located. And then he says, I'm going to go with them. So this is like a personal guided tour by the Lord himself to the Lamanites with these first 4 missionaries. I didn't know at the time, where did they go? Who did they go see? Yeah. Luckily, Parley P. Pratt wrote all about it in his journals. And then later on, it was in his autobiography.
Yeah.
And they went to 3 specific tribes, or actually 4 specific tribes. And what I found was absolutely fascinating is after I'd done the DNA research about the Algonquins,
all of them,
all of those tribes were Algonquin.
So where was it? What states? What
New York, Ohio, and Missouri. and they went in the dead of winter. They were eating frozen cheese and frozen bread. I mean, they were up to their, in one instance that says they were up to their knees in snow to try to get the message of the Book of Mormon to these people.
That sucks.
Well,
it sucks,
wouldn't the rebuttal be that, oh yeah, over thousands of years, the Lamanites have obviously covered the whole face of the land?
Describe that too. But the bottom line is that at least the Lord, we know, at least for one thing for sure, the people that they went to go see are Lamanites.
Lamanites. Okay, cool.
And that wasn't Joseph Smith. That's over his head.
Yeah, that's over his head. Now to the Joseph Smith.
Okay. So this is what a couple of things. I mean, really, if somebody just reads this book, they're going to have all this information. So if you have a copy of this book, you can do it.
It doesn't exist anymore, so sorry.
It doesn't exist. You can maybe find something on, on some
Find a
used
PDF.
bookstore. All right. Anyway, but this is from the Wentworth letter, which, by the way, part of that letter became canonized, right? So some of this is actually scriptural, right? This is Joseph Smith saying this. He says, I was also informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country. Well, what country is he in? Where's he talking about?
America.
Okay, it's America. And shown who they were and from whence they came. A brief sketch of their origin, their progress, their civilization, their laws and their governments, of their righteousness and iniquity and the blessings of God being finally withdrawn from them as a people was made known unto me. That's from Joseph Smith, okay?
And so he's sending that. So
he
what's the
says he
context
knew a
of
lot
that?
about it. Now, this doesn't specifically say geography, but let me ask you a question. If he knows where they came from and how they progressed and about their civilization, and right down to their very laws and governments, what's the chances that he was completely clueless about where this all took place?
Yeah, and he also just said of this country too.
Yeah.
So it's very clear.
Yeah.
That so what's the context of the Wentworth letters for those
That
who
was
don't
it.
know?
It was the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, while I was praying unto God and endeavoring to exercise faith in the precious promises of Scripture. On a sudden, a light like that of day, on a only far purer and more glorious appearance and brightness, burst into the room. In a moment, a person has appeared before me, surrounded with a glory yet greater. This messenger proclaimed himself to be an angel of God, and so forth. That was from the Wentworth letter.
So he wrote this to who? So what's the context of the actual letter?
Like,
Joseph
who's he
Smith
writing
wrote this.
to?
Who's he writing to? When did he write it?
Yeah, well, basically, the Wentworth letter had to do with that kind of tells you basically. This is actually from the Times and Seasons for 1st of March, 1842. Okay, so this was later. Okay, so this is long
Near the end of
after
his life.
that. Yeah, towards the end, about 3 years from the end of his life there. Okay, but the Wentworth letter, like I said, most of that was, or at least a good portion of that, was canonized. And interestingly enough, in the manual, actually, with Joseph Smith in the priesthood manual, they cut that particular part off about the aboriginal inhabitants of this country. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me a couple other quick ones. The American Revivalist account is another really interesting. 1833, Joseph Smith penned a letter to the editor of American Revivalist and Rochester Observer, and he described the Book of Mormon this way. He says, the Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. By it we learn that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them. The editor then basically, he edited it down to a smaller thing, published it. Joseph Smith got wind of the fact that he actually edited it down. And so Joseph Smith wrote him another letter and corrected him and basically said this: his response to N.E. Seton, editor of the American Revivalist Rochester Observer, recorded in the history of the church February 12th as follows. To N.E. Seton, Rochester, dear sir, I was somewhat disappointed on receiving my paper with only a part of my letter inserted in it. The letter which I wrote you was for publication, I wrote by the commandment of God. And I am quite anxious to have it all laid before the public, for it is of importance to them. I now say unto you that if you wish to clear your garments from the blood of your readers, I exhort you to publish that letter entire.
Dude, Joseph Smith had no chill. He went hard.
But if not, the sin be upon your head.
Yeah.
And so they actually published the whole letter, which is why we have this American Revivalist thing where he says the Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. Now, if he's in New York and you go west, how far west do you have to go to get to Guatemala?
You can't get to Guatemala going far
You can't
west.
get to Guatemala by going west.
Yeah.
So either Joseph Smith didn't know what he was talking about, or he's really talking about the western tribes of Indians, which happens to be the same ones that the Lord sent.
Because at first I was going to point out, I was like, okay, well, this is a letter. We were asking about inspired things, but then the fact that he followed up with, like, I wrote this by commandment of God, like, it definitely seems like he's talking
a little more
prophetically,
authoritative, right? Okay.
Interesting. And for those who also don't know, like the reason why it's Western tribes, even though to us they're considered Eastern tribes,
Right.
is because the United States ended like at the border of Illinois.
Well,
right?
and he's
and
in
so
New York.
Those are all West. and he's in
Everything
New
west
York.
of that is West.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that,
So
today we call
talking
it the
about
Midwest.
Illinois, Ohio
You know?
area. That's all west of
Yeah,
him.
exactly. And another thing,
Command.
another thing, when it comes down to it, these prophecies and promises, they are so important. How many promised lands are there, for example?
Yeah.
Well, I turn to the ultimate authority on promised lands. Basically, this is in 3rd Nephi, chapter 20. The ultimate
So
authority on promised
Jesus.
lands should be Christ, right? Jesus says, "Behold, this people will I establish in this land." Now he's talking to the Nephites, right? But actually, in this particular case, he's actually talking about the Latter-day Gentiles.
Okay.
Okay, this people meaning the Latter-day Gentiles, will I establish in this land, the land that he's on with the Nephites, unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob, and it shall be a new Jerusalem. So the land that he's on is going to become one day the New Jerusalem, which of course we know is going to be in
And that seems like a pretty
Guatemala.
good boundary. From what I was saying earlier, that seems like a pretty good boundary. Like this
Well,
land
yeah.
that you're on.
Yeah,
New
and it gets even more. There's 2 promised lands, Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem. Okay, these 2 promised lands are where basically, if you start off with the Garden of Eden, where was the Garden of Eden located? Well, according to science, all of humanity started off in Africa.
Yeah.
But according to the gospel, everything started off here in America, with the Garden of Eden being basically in what is now Missouri area, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and if that's the case, then I wanted to, well, where's the first mention of a promised land anywhere in the scriptures? And it's actually not in Genesis. You would think it'd be in the Old Testament, but actually it's in Moses in the book of
Exodus.
in the Pearl of Great Price.
Oh.
It's in the Pearl of Great Price in Moses. And basically it says that the first land of promise was named after Adam's great grandson, whose name was Canaan. And it's spelled Canain. Whereas Canaan of the in Jerusalem is Canaan. Right. So they're spelled differently, but it's the same word phonetically. Anyway, so the point basically is that there's these 2 promised lands that are mentioned by Christ. I think he's the expert on this. One of them is Jerusalem, the other one's New Jerusalem. And do we know where New Jerusalem is going to be by revelation or speculation?
Revelation.
Yeah. It's by revelation that we know the New Jerusalem is going to be in Jackson County, Missouri, and so forth and so on, right? So then we get down to like other things, like you have Ether. That the prophet basically Ether and the Jaredite prophet basically says he says in his writings that the New Jerusalem is going to be on their lands. And then you have Moroni, who takes the Ether's overall record and condenses it down into an abridged what we have today, right, with the Book of Ether basically, and he seconds it. So you have a double prophetic witness that the New Jerusalem is on the lands that were occupied both by the Jaredites and the Nephites, and that's not speculation. We know where that land is, according to, and I have it all here in this book, basically the revelations about where the New Jerusalem is going to be located. And it's in sections 54 and 84, and it's in about 3 or 4 different sections where the Lord tells him, he says, first it's kind of funny because the Lord kind of teases Joseph a little bit. He says, I'm going to tell you where the New Jerusalem is going to be in a couple of sections, and then he says, and then he just lays it out. Here it is. So either
Which
Joseph
the New
Smith
Jerusalem,
got
for
it
those
wrong,
who don't know, where does it say in the Doctrine and Covenants where New Jerusalem is going to be?
It says
Jackson County,
In
Missouri.
Jackson County.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But also just the whole idea that Joseph Smith was ignorant about all this stuff. Listen to Lucy Mack Smith. This is such a great
Which is
account.
Joseph's mom, right?
Joseph's mom, yeah. She says, during our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, their mode of travel, the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings with every particular, even their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. And this he would do with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life among them. Another quick one.
Why couldn't she have added just like, and where they lived?
Well, I mean,
Well, you get again.
She did right there. She said in this country.
I mean, if you have down to the laws and
like-
everything in their country, no, wait a minute. I have to say, so the
been
Mesoamerica
more
guys,
explicit.
what they're going to say is, well, this continent includes Mesoamerica,
Like I was saying.
because it's all of North
Earlier.
America, and
Yeah.
this is where,
Sometimes we forget that.
and this is the key. Okay, it said it would be a nation among other nations. It would be a mighty Gentile nation that was going to be established. Now, they argue and say, well, but which America are you talking about? The first 13 colonies, or later on when we had the Louisiana Purchase, or later on when we had, the Mexican territory purchases and so forth. Which America are you talking about here? And my answer to that is, do you believe that God knows what America was ultimately going to become? Wouldn't it then be? Would it be that difficult then to assume that God would understand that the United States was going to be what it is today?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then what are the borders and boundaries of this? It said it would be a nation among other nations. It would be a mighty Gentile nation. In fact, I have a list here. Let's kind of just go through this real quick, because this became so important. By the way, the New Jerusalem quotes here basically are, this is Doctrine and Covenants, section 42. He says, thou shalt ask, it shall be revealed unto you in my own due time where the New Jerusalem shall be built. Right? That was in February of 1831. A month later, on March the 7th of 1831, the Lord began to fulfill his promise to Joseph Smith when in Doctrine and Covenants, section 45, verse 64, he says, gather ye out from the eastern lands, go ye forth into the western countries. And then verse 66, it says, and it shall be called the New Jerusalem, a place of a land of peace, a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints. Okay? And then in section 84, he actually fulfills his promise to Joseph Smith to let him know exactly where the New Jerusalem is going to be. And this is a revelation of Jesus Christ and his servant Joseph Smith Jr. This is verses 1 through 4. To stand upon Mount Zion, which shall be the city of New Jerusalem, which city shall be built beginning at the temple lot, appointed by the finger of the Lord in the western boundaries of the state of Missouri.
Misery.
My mom came from Missouri.
So
and
they would say misery.
No, they don't. But anyway, and dedicated by the hand of Joseph Smith Jr., verily this is the word of the Lord, that the city of New Jerusalem shall be built by the gathering of the saints, beginning at this place, even the place of the temple. You don't get more specific than that. Right? That's absolute. I mean, he's telling us it's the state of Missouri, the western borders, and a place where the temple is. Okay? The bottom line is Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. Either we agree that that scripture is accurate. Is there any way that you can interpret that scripture differently?
No.
I think it's pretty
So going back to the
straightforward.
Book of Mormon reference of New Jerusalem, then essentially that's what the Lord was talking about. Right.
The lands... Let's
Is what you're saying.
let's just do a corollary.
Yeah.
If the Book of Mormon actually happened in Japan, let's say, okay, and you have these scriptures that basically talk about the New Jerusalem being specifically here in Missouri, and then you say the people in Japan say, and there's going to be a New Jerusalem. We are on the lands of the New Jerusalem. Does that make any sense?
No.
No. It only makes sense if their lands are also in Missouri.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Right?
understand.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then finally here for Doctrine and Covenants section 45, verses 66 to 67, it says, shall be called the New Jerusalem. And it says in verse 67, and it shall be called Zion. Okay. And then if you do this whole scriptural, I have a whole scriptural thing where basically Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is. The New Jerusalem is where Zion.
It's also Zion.
Now Zion is also, it's the pure in heart, but also is a physical location. Okay, the physical location of Zion says to be called the New Jerusalem. Of course, we know from the Article of Faith number 10, we believe in the literal gathering of Israel, the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built on the American continent. Well, again, the continent includes Canada and Mexico, because even today, it's defined pretty much by North America as a separate continent, even though it's connected.
Yeah.
They still consider the two as separate continents, right? Okay, so it's still there. Okay, but this is the key factor. It says an independence is the center place. This is section 57, the Doctrine and Covenants. This is the land of promise, the place for the city of Zion, and behold, the place which is now called independence is the center place. I went, whoa, hold on, Independence, Missouri is the center place. Back in Joseph Smith's day, that's not the center of anything. That's the far west edge of civilization. You go beyond that, you're in Indian territory, right? So when Joseph Smith got this revelation, he's probably thinking, what? What do you mean it's the center place? I actually have a whole presentation that talks about the center place being independence being the center place. If the land is being defined as all of the Americas, is independence in the center of that? Is that the center place of that land?
Is it?
Well, you tell me. If you go to,
I wish I could. I'm not. I don't.
I don't have my Google Earth app.
Okay, well, you know where Missouri is located,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so it's basically in the heartland of America, right? I actually have a whole presentation about this particular thing. But if the land is being defined as all of the Americas, the center place should be somewhere closer to Panama. If you take the two land masses, the center of it would be somewhere around Panama, but it's not. It's actually in the center of the United States of America.
Okay, now I know what you're saying.
It's not even in the center of the northern part, but it is almost exactly in the center. It's just a little bit to the east of center of America. From north to south and east to west, it's almost center if the land is being defined as the United States.
Yeah.
And we can go into all that here in a little bit. But bottom line, it says, I love this. This is from Ether again. It says, this is Moroni has now abridged the Ether's plates into the Book of Mormon in the Book of Ether. And Ether chapter 13 verse 4 says, behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon
This land.
The land of the Jaredites. Okay? And in verse 6, and that a new Jerusalem should be built upon this land unto the remnant of the seed of Joseph, for the which thing there's been a type. So Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is, which is where Zion, which is the land of promise, which is this land in the Book of Mormon. Okay? And then finally, here's 2 Nephi chapter 1. It says, but notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained this land of promise. It's a choice land above all other lands, for the inheritance of my seed, and also for those who be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. Okay, so then in Alma chapter 46, this gets interesting. They start to talk about this particular land, this nation. And a nation could be a number of people, like there's the nation of the Israelites. They're all over the place, right? But they're a nation, if you want to put it that way. So are they talking about kind of a geopolitical nation? Are they talking about a people? And the answer to that is pretty clearly they're talking about a geopolitical nation because it's among other nations. And they actually 8 times in the Book of Mormon, they call that nation a land of liberty. The land of freedom, basically, right? So freedom and liberty, by the way, not the same thing. But anyway, so it says it'd be a chosen land and the land of liberty. Okay, so in the United States, we have these things, like we have the Liberty Bell, the Statue of Liberty. Interestingly enough, they never call it the land of freedom, they call it land of liberty. If you look up in Noah Webster's dictionary under liberty, basically it says that it is freedom with the restraints placed by nature and nature's God. So liberty is not the same as freedom. Freedom gives you the ability to make the choice. Liberty is when you make the choice and you decide to follow God. That's what liberty is.
Interesting.
And the best definition of that is actually in the Book of Mormon and 2 Nephi. It says that you are free to choose liberty and eternal life, or captivity and death, right?
So they're already free, but that doesn't give them liberty. Liberty is when they choose it, right?
And not one of the founding fathers, liberty. But not one
really
of the founding
insightful.
fathers
I really
ever
like
called
that.
this the land of freedom. They always referred to it as the land of liberty, which means that we have already made our choice. We are free to choose, and we've chosen to follow God.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
That's cool.
Yeah,
I really like that.
There's some really
that's
cool
probably my
implications
favorite.
of
That's
that.
probably my favorite little nugget from this combo.
Yeah. Okay. So, but this is where it gets more restrictive. Okay. It says right here in 1 Nephi chapter 13. It says, nevertheless, this is verse 30. Nevertheless, thou beholdest that the Gentiles who have gone forth out of captivity. So who are Gentiles that came out of captivity to this promised land? Well, we could think, the pilgrims, and so forth, right? I mean, that and have been lifted up by the power of God above all other nations upon the face of the land, which is choice above all other lands. So in other words, they're saying that there's more than one nation on this land, and they're going to be in this particular nation, which the Lord God had made a covenant with my father that the seed should have for the land of their inheritance. So it's a nation above all other nations. Okay, so what nation qualifies to be the Book of Mormon promised land?
that Nephi's, that Lehi's inheritance will or not their inheritance, that Lehi's descendants will inherit that land too.
Yeah, okay, so this is basically, again, this is just going back to the land of Missouri, which is the land of promise and the place for the city of Zion. Okay, so all of that is consistent. Who are the Gentiles then? The Gentiles are going to go forth upon the many waters out of captivity. Okay, that's the New World Gathering place, as Heber J. Grant talks about. Well, we don't have time to go into all the details on this one. Okay,
Yeah, we could go forever.
Okay, but let me just get back to, there's so much good stuff here. So that it has these prophecies about that nation. Let me just give you a couple of them, okay? So this is 2 Nephi chapter 10, verses 11 and 14. It says, "And this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles, and there shall be no kings upon the land. And I will fortify this land against all other nations. And he that fighteth against Zion shall perish, saith God, for he that raiseth up a king against me shall perish, for I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king." So it's a nation that's not going to have a king, right? Okay. It says, "It came to pass, I Nephi," this is 1 Nephi chapter 13, verse 20 and 23. "It came to pass that I Nephi beheld that they, the Gentiles, did prosper in the land, and I beheld a book, and it was carried forth among them. Behold, it proceedeth out of the mouth of a Jew." So that the Bible was going to come forth out of this particular land. Okay, that's another prophecy about this nation. 1 Nephi chapter 13, verse 17. "And I beheld that the mother Gentiles were gathered together upon the waters and upon the land also to battle against them." So they're going to have battles between the mother country and this new land, right? So that's another prophecy about it. "And I Nephi beheld that the Gentiles that had gone out of captivity were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of all other nations," which tells you it's a geopolitical place.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a nation among other nations, and it's going to be delivered out of the hands of every other nation. In other words, it's going to be established a new nation, a new place. This nation has to be a new place. And then Doctrine and Covenants section 101, verse 80 says, "And for this very purpose have I," this is the Lord speaking, "established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up for the very purpose." So that would make some sense, that if God was actually trying to set up a new nation, and then he says that he's responsible for the bringing forth of the Constitution, that's got to be at least somewhat significant in this whole conversation about where the Book of Mormon took place. And then, I'd love to get into that part here. This is actually has to do with the covenant stuff.
I think just to kind of, put a bow on all this, like, I really do, like, when I talk to, those who espouse the Mesoamerica theory, like it is pretty clear. It is pretty clear that it seems as if the prophecies very strongly point towards the United States of America. And like the one thing that we probably don't have the time to get into because we've run more than 2 hours on this, but we'll probably have to do a part 2, is the one thing that they do have in Mesoamerica is really impressive archaeology.
Yes.
And also tons that has been done.
Yes.
Way more than has been done in North America, especially with the mound builder civilization.
Yeah.
And so
To some extent,
I think to a lot of people, when they're looking for something they can hold on to, because a prophecy, you can't really hold on to it in the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we have America, we have that, but like physical things that show a civilization, I think that's one thing why people gravitate towards the Mesoamerica. Right. And I know that it's not that there aren't any in North America.
Civilization. Yeah.
Yeah, grand civilization.
Yeah.
And it's not that that doesn't exist in North America, but it's in many ways it's less shiny to look at here in North America. When you go to a mound,
but which was more shiny,
the
Greeks and the Romans or the Jews? Which had a shinier?
Greeks and Romans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fact that somebody has great ruins does not necessarily make them God's
but what
people.
I'm saying
fact,
is that
actually
there's
the
more
antithesis of
archaeological
God's people.
evidence of a large civilization
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that.
And what I'll say, and Hayden can be a witness to this, like, after we talked to all these people, like, for example, after we talked to Wayne May, I'm like, all right, bro, I'm a Heartlander now. And then we go and we talk to Mike Handy that showed a lot of evidences of the coming of Christ, and that's how that's documented in a lot of Mayan architecture.
Can I address that real quick, though?
Yeah.
Because that's another great one, because people go, well, wait a minute, but But what about this Quetzalcoatl and the feathered serpent and all that kind of stuff that we find on the motifs down in Central America? And the answer to that is so simple. It's right before us. When Christ came to the Nephites, he said, "Now I was just in Jerusalem, and now I'm here with you." And what did he say?
I have other sheep.
I have other. There's other sheep. Do you think that Christ actually then went to these other sheep? And if he did they record it?
Yeah.
So does that make the
land of Book of Mormon?
So
no,
my sister
doesn't.
served a mission in Japan, right?
Yeah.
They have a similar kind of a thing of a bearded God that comes there and visits them. Does that make everybody that Christ went and visited the Nephites? Or does it mean it's one of those lucky people who got a visit from Christ?
Yeah. And so like after that, obviously that opened my eyes to that idea. But then even after talking to Kirk Magleby and like the extensive, like tens of thousands of hours this man has dedicated towards putting together that Excel spreadsheet.
You can say whatever you want about Kirk Magleby. He's not lazy.
Yeah.
No,
I
agree.
I left his
I like
place.
Kirk. He's actually a really kind of
Oh, yeah. He's awesome.
He's a fun guy. I like.
I left his house and I'm like,
Yeah.
dang, bro, back to being a mess. and then after looking at this, and so what I want to say with all of this rambling here is that, bro, stop being married to your ideas because there's a plethora of different evidences that match different geography points. And so in every which way, like no matter what method you're espousing, whether that be Mesoamerica, Heartland, there's a lot of good stuff for both.
Okay.
There's a lot of good stuff for both.
Well, there is, but there's only one truth. They both can't be right.
Which is
and
true.
that's an unfortunate situation.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
They could both be wrong.
That's true. They could both be wrong.
And that's
That is true.
That's what I want everyone to freaking know. This is what fires me up. Is you both can't be right, but you could both be wrong.
Yeah, that is
And
definitely,
that's
definitely a possibility.
And that's
Yes.
that's where I want to kind of end it. Is it's like, let's all just admit that we don't know 100% exactly where the Book of Mormon happened, but we do believe that it is the Word of God. This is epic.
But if we have 20 different areas of research that all point to the same conclusion, like, for example, animals and plants in the Book of Mormon, they talked about having grapes and wheat and
the
barley.
migration stuff for sure.
And they had sheep and goats. None of those ever existed in Central America. They're all indigenous to North America. They talked about having fine twined linen. Linen is made of the flax plant. There's no flax plants in Central America. There's 3 different types of flax plants in North America. Weather and climate, probably the single biggest one that always people go, well, if it happened in North America, how come they didn't mention snow? I said, well, it does actually mention snow. It talks about the driven snow, but that was in vision. It does actually talk about hail as well. But the interesting thing is how many times do they talk about rain?
Yeah, it just doesn't talk about weather, really.
Wouldn't you expect them to talk
Except
a lot
for
about rain in Central America? That
Mm-hmm.
when it has a rainy season, where it's just everything is soaking wet for about 6 months.
Yeah.
Apparently weather wasn't that important, but weather is one thing, climate is another thing. Climate is very different. It talks about, for example, whirlwinds in the Book of Mormon. Whirlwinds don't happen in Central America. There's never been even a Category 1 tornado in Central America, but in the heartland of America, it's Tornado Alley, right?
Yeah.
And they describe people being carried away in a whirlwind. Now that was during the time of Christ, and people say, well, that could have been just a one-off big thing that happened. But that's one way you could explain it. But you could also just explain it. Well, maybe because it happened where whirlwinds happen. You don't have to try to invoke a whole. Well, God just moved all the hurricane weather down to Central America for one event, and then moved it back up here for the rest of it.
Yeah.
There's way more to that, even when it comes down to linguistics. People say, well, wait a minute, but the people up here didn't have a written language. I say, well, wait a minute. How much written language would you expect to find if the Book of Mormon account is true? Because the Lamanites were determined to destroy the language of the Nephites, right? And so down in Central America, you have every wall and every edifice is covered with language. Why didn't the Lamanites wipe all that out if that was the Nephites?
Yeah.
You would expect to not find
it
much. In fact, you'd hardly find any linguistic evidence.
Yeah.
So when you add up the DNA, the geography, which we haven't even gotten into really, do you want to go into the geography? Because it's just
We'll have
not
to
on
do a
this
part
one. We're
two.
gonna have to
We'll
do
have
a
to
part
do a
two
part
because
two.
it would go on forever.
Okay,
But let's do a wrap up of what you were saying. So the DNA.
Yeah. So when you add all of these different things up, all the prophecies in the Book of Mormon that point to the United States of America is the promised land. It is the nation above all other nations. It's where the Gentiles were. It's where the gospel was restored. It's where the New Jerusalem is located. All of those prophecies you have to ignore in favor of your particular personal interpretation of the geography passages. Okay? So if you add up all of these other things, the archaeology, the linguistics, the DNA, the animals and the plants, the prophecies in the Book of Mormon, and all of these other areas of research, they all point to one conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's, it happened in the heartland of America. If you take just this one thing and you say, okay, we're just going to do a geographic passages deal, and based on our interpretation, the only place that works is Mesoamerica, then that's what you got.
Yeah.
But when nothing else works, that's why millennials and Gen X's and Gen Z's see through the Mesoamerican stuff. That's why it's been dying a very quick death lately.
Yeah.
Our books are by far and away the most the most purchased and so forth. There's after John Sorensen's book, which has been around.
Speaking to people.
Yeah, John Sorensen's book has been around for over 30 years. It sold 25,000 copies. This book has sold 65,000 copies. And the new annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, which is now the #1 best-selling edition of the Book of Mormon,
Really?
is right here, in Desert Book and
I
so
need to
forth.
give me one of those.
Beautiful.
Oh man, this has all of that information and research embedded along with the original text completely reformatted. It's
Really?
the first ever edition of the Book of Mormon that's actually a red letter edition. You know, other faiths have had red letter editions of the New Testament.
Yeah.
I love that because you can see immediately if Christ is speaking or who's speaking. So when you see red letters, that's either Christ or God speaking. When you see blue words, blue letters, that's actually angels or prophets like Isaiah speaking. It's completely reformatted so it actually has direct quotes, like, thus saith the Lord commanded me, saying, this is in Mosiah chapter 11.
Yeah.
And then it's actually indented, put into quotation marks and so forth. And then finally, there's over 260 pages of insights and information on wherever you have these gold bars.
Does
So
any
it
of it
says-
have to do with geography?
A lot of it does.
Really?
Yeah. And the prophecies, everything we've been talking about here is all put into this thing, and it's by far and away the #1 best-selling edition of the book.
That's
of
exciting.
Mormon.
Dang.
And
Give me one of those.
yeah, we're on our fourth printing of this book already. And
That's
this
awesome.
coming year, Desert Book just ordered like 500 more copies just for Christmas and
That's
stuff.
super
So
cool.
What does this symbol mean?
that's our publisher symbol.
Yeah,
That's
it's Digital
his logo.
Legend.
That's his logo.
That's
yeah.
what's his
Digital
name?
Legend.
Why am I blanking
Boyd.
on his name? Boyd.
Tuttle.
Yep, Boyd Tuttle.
If you guys think that Book of Mormon sounds really cool, we asked Rod and we got it set up where you can get this for a 15% discount if you buy it on Digital Legend's website using the discount code The Stick of Joseph. So, link in the description. Get yours if you want it.
But listen, so I guess the main takeaway that I would have from our conversation today is that if you have a flawed methodology, it will tend to create more and more options and more variability. If you take instead and have a whole bunch of different things and they all point to the same conclusion over and over and over again, which methodology do you
go
think is
with?
more robust?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Come on now.
That's awesome.
Can you commit to
We're
that?
not gonna commit
You're
to
not gonna
anything
commit?
right here.
Dude,
We,
this is wild, bro.
Look, how can you take the prophecies of Joseph Smith as being less important than the geography passages?
2 minutes.
Okay.
I don't see how that happens.
Yeah. No. Well, Rod, this has been awesome. We're gonna continue this conversation, and we want
it's so much more.
We want this conversation to happen with multiple parties that don't
Look
all
at Jackson,
agree.
he's like,
Dude,
So,
this is
Wow,
epic.
It's been
bro.
super fun. We're gonna have to have another combo. So, Rod, once again, where can people find you? What website? And anything else you want people to know?
Yeah, so bookofmormonevidence.org is our primary website, and on that we have literally dozens, even hundreds of articles and
Cool.
and videos and that kind of stuff. But if you want to really get into, if you're the kind of person who just loves to just get in and have a nice big piece of steak for for your study,
Your learning.
for your learning. If you're done with the milk and you're ready for some meat, right? Then go to our website and if you want to make a little bit of a commitment, it's a big commitment though. It's like $7.97 a month. Okay, so that's 30 days. So I mean, you break it up, it's a few cents a day.
Yeah.
And you can have access to the largest repository of information and research that's ever been assembled on the Book of Mormon. Over 1,500 1-hour or longer presentations by over 400 experts on the Book of Mormon in every field, every single thing that you can think about, right?
And that's on that
has
same
been-
website. That's on that same
has
website.
been covered by all kinds of different
Okay.
people, whether it's Wayne May or
Sweet.
Jonathan or Hannah or myself or dozens and people think that like I'm the guru guy or whatever. I'm kind of become the face of it because I have these big events. But
Yeah.
I always said after I did my first DVD, there's going to be other people who are a lot smarter than me who are going to come along and flesh out this. But I guess I would have to give myself the credit to kind of be the one that kind of start to put this all together and bring together the experts
For sure.
to do this.
Cool.
And we haven't been highly funded. I mean, like we've done all of this on our own bill, and by selling books and so forth that people, if they don't want them, they don't have to buy them, right? So it's a fully voluntary deal. We're not trying to get people to give us a ton of money and so forth to do our research. We're doing it because we love the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
We love the evidences, and we know that it hurts the church when people are given stuff that doesn't make sense.
For sure.
And when people look at the Mesoamerican stuff and they go, wait a minute, there's no DNA evidence, there's no, and you go through the list, and it doesn't make sense, at some point, that has to affect their faith. Because faith goes to a certain point, right? But at some point, you also have to have the physical reality connected with the spiritual reality of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Was it a real history of real people and places and events? And the answer to that is yes, and we can actually tell you who the archaeological people are, where their findings are. These mounds, the mound builders and so forth, they sequence the DNA from the mound builders, and sure enough, they have the DNA that links them to modern day Israelites. I mean, that's stuff that we've never had before, as long as the Mesoamerican theory was holding things. So I think we need to get back to what Joseph Smith said, back to what the Lord said, back to the prophecies in the Book of Mormon. You can't ignore those. If you ignore those, you're going to do so at your own peril. And the peril is that your theory is going to die, and the Mesoamerican theory is dang near dead. There's only a few people who are hanging on to it still, but the vast majority of members of the church, when I go around the places, they're Heartlanders.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Rod, we appreciate it. We're going to have to continue the conversation, and thank you so much, and thank you to all you who have been watching.
Thank you, guys.
Please share your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, stay curious and hungry.